It was the summer of '98, a hot California desert. I was 5 years old riding shotgun in my mom's crappy little convertible. It barely ran, but the seats were red velvet. The radio worked, and being able to take the top down almost made up for the lack of air conditioning. My days were normally spent at daycare or the babysitters, as my single student mom put in long hours at her job to provide for us. I didn't mind. It just meant that days like today were even more special. My mom was driving me across to the next county to my cousin's house for a birthday party that was going to be complete with dress-up games and ice cream cake. To truly seal the deal, she had taken us to McDonald's right before we headed out on our drive. I got a Happy Meal with a stuffed Simba from The Lion King as my toy. That'll be important later. Our convertible eased onto the freeway, and for the most part, it was a pleasant and uneventful ride. I remember the loud noise of the cars and the hot wind. I first became aware of the truck as it lays on its horn behind us. I turned in my seat to see a huge gray monster of a truck tailgating us ridiculously close. As soon as it was safe, my mom changed to the slow lane on the right of the freeway, assuming that the truck would pass us. He pulls level to our car, rolls down the window and begins screaming at us to pull over, in the middle of the desert on a freeway. My mom ignores him and tells me to do the same. I remember feeling uneasy but less scared than annoyed. Kind of like, dude, come on, this is my day to have fun, leave us alone. And besides, I wasn't really a stranger to angry shouting men, even at that age. Unfortunate but true. I think the lack of reaction irritated the man, or maybe this had been his plan the entire time. But he swiftly pulls into our lane and essentially forces us off the road onto the shoulder. My mom does her best to maintain control of the car and to not make contact with the other vehicle, but that's pretty much impossible. The unmistakable crunch of metal rings out and both vehicles come to a stop. Again, on the side of a desert freeway, there wasn't really a lot of places for us to go and there wasn't really anybody else around. My mom checks me to see if I'm okay and remains in her seat. Now, if I were her, I don't know if I would have waited to confront this man with a child in my car after that stunt. However, my ma has and always will be the tough as nails type of gal who isn't afraid of anything, especially when she feels like she's been wronged. And of course, she had no idea what was to happen next. In a flash of anger and cursing, the man is at the driver's side door, screaming about the damage done to his car and how it was caused because of food trash that had been flying out of the convertible, landing on his front window and blocking the view. He starts demanding compensation, that my mom get out of the car and come and look at his car. At this point, my mom refuses to get out of the car. She points at a call box a fair distance away, you remember those, and said that it was best to call the cops and let them handle this. Not the answer the angry man had wanted. In one fluid moment, this man grabs the back of my mother's head, and once, twice, and 3 times, smashes it into the steering wheel, leaving her unconscious. Lifting her like a sack of potatoes, he drops her on the side of the road and jumps into the driver's seat, keys still in the ignition, and he starts the car up. I haven't even reacted yet. I think I was in an absolute state of shock. It wasn't until I felt the car moving and getting back on the road that I registered what had happened. And when it hit me hard. I went ballistic. I was no longer just annoyed with this man, I was now furious for what he did to my mom. I remember that I held my stuffed Simba by the tail as I climbed out of my seat, and began screaming while whipping the man in the face, trying to blind him. My battle cry, I'll always remember it, was, "You're the meanest man in the whole world." I clawed and kicked and gave no care to what was going to happen to me, just that this man was going to pay. This led to a couple of things happening. First, I made it impossible to drive that car safely, and he ended up crashing into another shoulder. Second, by this time, people had started to see a combination of a woman lying on the shoulder and a convertible with a Tasmanian devil of a 5-year-old beating up some creeper, and they began to alert the authorities. I don't remember too much after that. I remember the cops coming and sitting in the back of a police cruiser. They gave me a teddy bear and asked me a lot of questions, and my grandma came and picked me up. My mom went to the hospital where she thankfully didn't have any major damage, just a busted up nose and some whiplash. I never made it to my cousin's party, and never saw that white convertible again. I'll always be thankful for my main man Simba having my back through all of that. I don't know what that man's intentions were. Looking back and knowing the area that we lived in, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if drugs played a major part in all of this. This happened about 10 years ago, and at the time, I was a 14-year-old male, and I was enrolled in high school. My mom worked at a nearby apartment complex as a manager, so she would pick me up from school at 2:40 and bring me home instead of having to ride the bus for a couple hours. The day is completely normal so far. She picks me up from school, then brings me home. No more than 10 minutes after I'm home, a black car pulls up in the driveway and I hear a hard knock on the door. I look through the glass on the front door and I can clearly see a man wearing a hoodie in the summer, laying on the ground in front of the door. I guess he assumed he was completely hidden because my mom had a wreath on the door, and the space between the window and bottom of the door was wide enough that someone could probably assume I couldn't see them. Well, I saw him. I ran and grabbed the house phone and called the police from the kitchen, where I could see the car. I had a machete. I was a teenager that thought swords and stuff were cool, don't judge me. And I waited around the corner of the door while still on the phone with the police. At this point, the man knocks again. So I took matters into my own hands and I yell as loud as I can, "Leave now or I'll freaking kill you." I had a pretty deep voice for my age. Thank you, early puberty. So I guess he thought that I was a full-grown man, because this man got up and hauled butt like an Olympic sprinter. So about 3 minutes or so passed and the police get to my house. We had no cameras or anything, so there's really nothing to go off of to pursue this person. The cops pretty much tell me that I handled the situation well and the laws about self-defense. The man never returned, and that was pretty much the end of it. I've looked back on this a lot over the years, and this man almost certainly wanted to rob us. What's the most creepy about this to me is that he most likely had scoped us out, saw that we were just a teenage boy and a single mother, went through the trouble of learning our routines, and waited for what he thought was the ideal moment to rob us. We bought a handgun because of this, so I never really lost any sleep over this because I knew if he came back, that I had a surprise for him too. This happened back in early 2015. I was then a 19-year-old guy living in a rather bad area of Portland, Oregon. Even though there were occasionally some belligerent homeless people and addicts, violent muggings were rare and most of the city felt very safe even at night. One of my best friends had turned 21 and we decided to go bar hopping and go clubbing. I was in a group of about a dozen other people, then 3 of which were my roommates. Unfortunately for me, I was the only one in my group who was either under the legal drinking age or didn't have a fake ID. This meant that I was unable to enter the bar. However, to my luck, there was a nice Mediterranean restaurant right across the street from the bar, which I ended up going to. I stayed there for more than an hour and then I was ready to leave. I've done that walk many times, even at night, so I was never scared. Until this night, of course. From my apartment, my roommates took an Uber to the bar, and This meant that I would have to walk back since I didn't have Uber and my phone battery was running low. The distance back to my apartment was about 3 miles, and the time was already close to midnight and I would be reaching my apartment at around 1 a.m. I decided to walk the distance anyway since I hadn't been at the gym and thought that this would be some good exercise. I began my walk and I passed by lots of different drunks. Even though some of the drunks would shout things at me, I never felt unsafe or threatened by them, so I was okay. However, the last mile to my apartment was through a darkly lit park that can be quite scary at night. Not because of the crime, but because there is only one streetlight on that stretch of road. I reached this somewhat creepy area at around 12:30. As I descend down the dark and narrow street, I notice a black Chevy Silverado speed past me and slow down once he passes me. The truck almost comes to a stop but then decides to drive ahead. I begin to shrug it off at first. However, this is where things start to get creepy. After a walk nearly a quarter-mile forwards, the Chevy Silverado comes down the opposite direction, and it does the same thing. When the trucks slow down and almost come to a halt, I begin to panic but not openly show it. I pretend to ignore the vehicle, but my instincts tell me that something isn't right. The truck then starts to proceed, but this time I cannot keep calm. I was not in the middle of a dark and isolated park with no streetlights, and there likely wouldn't be a single person in sight. After I walk about 500 feet more, I begin to look in horror as the same pickup truck comes flying towards me and puts a sudden brake on about 100 feet behind me. One man around twice my age and bald opens the passenger door and comes out of his truck carrying what looked like a hockey club. I look behind and lock eye contact with him. He gives me the most haunting and sinister look I've seen from a real person, and he begins to yell, "Get the heck out of my sight, or I'll mess you up." And he called me an inappropriate name. As I was planning my escape, I remember how there was a wooded area between the park and my apartment. Where I was at, I could cut across the park and go through some woods, and then right across the woods was my apartment. And this was smart because I have taken that shortcut during the day and the truck will not be able to cut through the woods. Just as I ran towards those woods, I heard another yelling in the distance. "Hey, screw you!" yelled another large guy walking on the opposite direction of the sidewalk that I was. I then see another large man walking his German Shepherd towards me. After there, the truck driver then started running at us with his hockey club, and I made a run for it. I darted towards the woods. Fortunately, the truck driver decides not to chase us and he gets back in his truck, and I reach my apartment 5 minutes later. At the parking lot of my apartment, I happened to see the guy walking his dog. He looked like a roughed up bodybuilder, so I was also a little afraid of him too. However, we had a pleasant conversation. I began to head up to my apartment and look at my apartment window, and to my disgust and horror, I see the black Chevy Silverado drive by my apartment and then leave. My friends came back home close to 3 in the morning, just after I went to bed for that night. Thankfully, I never saw that creep again, and I moved out of that apartment a few months later. After this incident, I avoid walking alone in dark spots and isolated areas at night. I've done quite well for myself as an adult, but when I was younger, we were very poor. In middle school, I lived in a government housing project that were like little one-level apartments with 2 apartments sharing a wall each, all spaced apart. There were woods directly behind the cluster of apartments with no gate in between, but no one ever went into the woods, which I learned the reason for due to this incident. These apartments were very poorly made and the windows could easily be popped in and out, never mind a lock. The front door was somewhat sturdy, but with a good kick, it could have easily been opened. My dad was a pretty stocky bodybuilder type, so I had a false sense of security and would leave my window blinds open at night, as my room faced some of the trees that would blow in the wind. I loved nature and I wasn't afraid of the dark, so I liked watching the trees when I fell asleep. Our apartment's front door was facing this woods, as was my friend's behind ours with our building blocking their view. As you walk in the front door, the hallway is on the left, and my room was at the end of the hallway on the right. My big window that took up most of the wall was on the left end. My bed was sideways facing both walls, so I could lay on my side and watch the trees. The woods were about a field away facing our front door, so I couldn't see it from my room. This was just a small area of trees and vegetation. One night, I woke up feeling a sense of unease and through my sleepy haze, made out the figure of a large man standing at my window, watching me sleep with total confidence, not caring at all if he was seen. He was in a big coat and looked quite burly and average to taller height. It was black in my room and outside, just barely illuminated by moonlight. I had just cracked open my eyes and I froze once I realized what I was seeing. I kept my eyes as closed as possible, just enough to peer at him in the darkness, and literally rolled out of my bed to the side, not facing the window, and shouted for my dad who was across the hallway with both of our doors open as I crawled out. Not the smartest, but I was a dumb 12-year-old. He hadn't gone to sleep yet and was in my room in a heartbeat as the guy took off. He went to run out the front door yelling threats as well, which probably wasn't smart, but the guy was long gone. I truly believe he never came in before or after this, just due to my dad's sheer size and build, but I'll never know. A few nights later, I was spending the night at my friend's who lived directly behind us with the same layout. Her room was the first room on the left with her window facing the woods and our apartment blocking the view. Her sisters were on the second on the left, and her mom and toddler sister were in the room on the right, like mine in my own apartment. We finished watching Dave Chappelle and went to do one another's hair in her room, with her older sister helping us, while their mom and little sister went to bed. Not long after, we heard screaming from her mom's room and heavy stomping feet. Her older sister swung open the door to the room that we were in, and there was just a flash of a huge white man in his 30s or 40s running down the hall towards the living room, and the front door, and her mom behind him with a butcher knife hacking at the air and screaming bloody murder. The dude flew out of the door and towards the woods while her mom locked her door and called the police. This man had the audacity to pop open the window and crawl into the bed that was pushed against the window just slightly under it, not realizing this woman was a whole Amazon warrior who slept with a butcher knife and would clearly wake up to protect her baby. She was quick and had slashed at him, though I'm not sure of the damage since I was ushered home directly after. The cops went looking in the woods for him and found him and another man quite similar to him living and hiding out there together. They were also responding to a call from a frantic mother whose little girl had been taken that day as well from our housing units, and they found her with those creeps. She had been there all day and night with them and was around 3 to 4. They were taken to jail, and that's the last I heard of it, as the adults didn't let us in on the adult conversation. Poor little girl was probably traumatized, and I hope she's been able to heal. I can't imagine what could have happened if my friend's mom hadn't been so quick and slept with a weapon, or if he had decided to fight instead of run. I still don't understand why he didn't try to overpower her, but it's probably because she had injured him. After this, my dad explained to me how sometimes addicts or homeless people would hang out in those woods. I'm a short, medium-sized girl, One day, around the time I was about 8 months pregnant, I made a trip out to Target to buy some things. I'm a very cautious person, constantly looking at my surroundings with mild paranoia. Mostly inherited from my mom, who raised 3 kids on her own, so she was always on guard. I got out of my new car, which I parked a little far from the store entrance, for 2 reasons. I didn't want to get any dents from other drivers, and I tried to get as much exercise as I could because I was pregnant. As I'm walking, I notice a huge red truck with 3 men inside with the windows down. I assumed that they were waiting for someone inside the store, but something creeped up my neck when I made eye contact with the driver. I turned quickly away and immediately became very self-conscious. A small girl, visibly pregnant, I suddenly felt so vulnerable. Up until that point, my pregnancy had been smooth and never made me feel like a target. Once I finally got into the store, I felt more relaxed and went about my shopping. When I left the store, I noticed the truck was still there. I put my bag in the trunk and got in my car quickly and turned it on and drove away. I noticed in my rearview mirror the truck was also taking off, with only the 3 same men inside of it. My heart sank. I realized that they weren't waiting for anyone inside the store. I got in a lane that could only make a left turn, and they were on a lane that could only go straight a few cars behind me. I thought, great, we're not going in the same direction. I was just being paranoid. As I passed the light turning, I see the red truck switch the lane that I was in to turn left. I sped up to catch the next light turning yellow, to put as much distance between them and me. I drove a little faster than usual, but as I realized even if I made it home, they could still follow me there and I would be going to an empty house. So instead, I drove past my street to a shopping center that had a Starbucks. The drive-thru wrapped around the building so you aren't visible to the main road that I was driving in. I get into the drive-thru and I notice the red truck going in the road that I just left. They drive past the Starbucks and I think finally all is good. As I'm still in the drive-thru, I see the truck pass by again in the opposite direction, almost as if they were looking for me. I wait in the drive-thru for the other cars to leave at this time, and I call my sister and tell her what has been going on and that I'm heading to her place. I didn't want to go home alone and my boyfriend wouldn't be home for several hours. As I'm driving to my sister's house, which is about 25 minutes away, my mind just begins to wander if they caught up to me or what could have happened if these men were following me. Any danger that could have happened to me or my baby made me so paranoid that I didn't leave my house really for the remainder of my pregnancy. I was shaking by the time that I got to my sister's, and I told her all the details that I could remember. I'm a 20-year-old female, and the story that I'm going to tell you happened just recently. I've had many creepy encounters and experienced a lot of truly scary things during my life, so I figured out this would be the right place to collect all of it. I and my mother decided to go grocery shopping together 2 days ago, so we took the car and I don't have a license yet, drove to the nearest and biggest mall to get as many supplies as possible. Because of the ongoing lockdown for the pandemic, it's better to make only a few trips to avoid unnecessary contact. It took us a while to arrive there, and once we did, she pulled up near the stores when I could see a couple men. It is very common in my area to find people stationing in malls and supermarket parking lots, and they are usually quite harmless if you do as they say. They say that they're waiting for cars to come, and when this happens, they show the drivers some parking spots to ask what it's called. A protection fee, basically. You pay them, or otherwise, they'll be damaged under your vehicle. It is of course illegal, but the government here doesn't seem really bothered by these kinds of activities. Anyway, we met those illegal workers many times before, so it wasn't something too scary for us at first. My mother parked the car and then two of those came near her window and asked for the fee, which wasn't much luckily. While she was giving them the money, I looked out to the side that I was sitting in and then froze. There were at least 10 other men. 2 of them were fighting, I don't know over what, and 1 threw a punch too. Only when I looked closer, I saw something shiny. In his grip, there was a knife. I started freaking out internally because this situation was way more dangerous than it seemed at the beginning. The worst scenarios were running through my head. 2 women, 2 men with a weapon. I was then brought back to reality when my mother told me to get out of the car to reach the stores. So I immediately jumped out of my seat and got by her side, ready to protect her. But when I saw that she was chatting and exchanging jokes with one of the 2 dudes from before, I realized she hadn't seen the group of men that were coming towards us. My mom has a very sunny and friendly personality, which, let me tell you, can be a very dangerous thing around strangers. I'm not blaming her, I love my mother, but an excessive, expansive attitude can cost you a lot. I know sometimes I can come off as antisocial, but it's better to be careful and distant than having a knife on your throat. I quickly told her that we had to go, with urgency in my voice but keeping a cold and firm tone. If you show people that you're scared, then you are screwed. You must never show it, because it makes you an easier target. She followed me, asking what was wrong and trying to tell me that we were safe. So I whispered, "Keep going and stay silent." And only then she saw the group of men staring at us. She proceeded to look in another direction while walking, but I didn't. I gave one of the men a look full of hatred that was screaming, "Do not try to harm us, sir, I'll fight." I knew they were numerically superior, but I'd been practicing boxing for years, so I wasn't going down without battling for my mother's life. The man got the message and looked away. It was still daytime, so if I screamed, people would hear us and call the cops. Plus, criminals prefer, as I said before, easy and weak targets. I didn't bring any weapons with me that day, I usually do, but I will make sure to never commit that mistake again. We got out of the mall when it was getting dark. I suggested a secondary way to get to the car. The men were all still hanging out in the parking lot. There was a little light and we also had a lot of things to bring with us now. We made it to the vehicle safely because they didn't see us coming, but I swear that I'm never going to forget my weapons from now on. So, this might not be creepy, but it definitely unsettled me quite a bit, and has made me not want to get back to the grocery store for a while. Just the other day, I had to stop off at the grocery store to pick up a birthday cake for my client, and as I'm trying to put my things away into my car so I can get to work, I work as an in-home caregiver. This guy comes up asking for his spare change. He was trying to ask my name while telling me his and that he's a good guy, and that he had just fallen on some hard times, yada yada. I decided to be nice and give him a couple of bucks, but I accidentally pulled out a 5. I went to put it back and he was like, "I'm a good guy, you should give me that 5. I decided to take the good karma and just get rid of the guy, so I gave him the $5 and went back to load up my groceries. He stayed there, standing about a foot away from me, asking if I'm a nurse. I was in scrubs. If I have kids and if I wanted to go on a date. Do I have any drugs? What's my name? Why am I so pretty? I just kept telling him no and then went around to the driver's side of my car. Thank God I have a habit of locking my car with the remote and then hitting unlock once so only the driver's side is unlocked, because I saw him reach for the passenger side door. I asked him what he was doing and then he asked me for a ride. I yelled at him that I already had given him $5 and that he needed to leave me alone and stop bothering me, and then he needs to get out of here. He pulled on the door handle a couple of times and then muttered a bad name at me, and then wandered off to find his next target. This happened a month ago when I was working at a store called Box Lunch. It was on the upper level of a mall. I'm 16 and a dude, and I've worked there for maybe 5 to 6 months before this happened. I was working the late shift, which was from 6 to 9 p.m. that day. Store closes at 9, and that's when I would lock up and leave. I was working with one other person that night. Let's call her May. She was my age, but maybe an older by a month. She was a super fun person to hang out with and to work with. She was chill and not super talkative, which was great because I'm not talkative either. We went to the same high school, so we sort of knew each other and got along easily. I would even pick her up sometimes to go to work if we were working the same shift. Side note, totally not related to the story, but I think May liked me and I kinda hope so cause I really liked her too. Anyways, we were both behind the counter just talking and laughing. May I remind you that there was barely anyone in the mall because it was late, so that left me and May alone in the store for a while. So, as we're talking, this skinny man wearing a train conductor hat walks into the store. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s or a little bit older. He was wearing this dirty green jacket and badly ripped up jeans. This dude looked like he was homeless, but I didn't want to assume anything. May greeted him with a smile and he didn't pay attention to her, just kept on walking through the store. We kinda looked at each other with a sort of, yikes, what's up with this guy look. As he was walking through the store, I kept an eye on him, to make sure that he wouldn't try to steal anything. I didn't see him try to reach for anything, but he kept talking to himself and glancing back at May and I. Mainly May. I was getting a weird vibe off this guy. After about 15 minutes, the guy walked up to the counter and placed a Terminator Funko Pop on the counter. I asked him the usual cashier questions, which he didn't answer any of them. He wasn't even looking at me. He kept glancing at May, who was messing around with the computer. I don't think she noticed. I told him his total, and he pulled out a crumpled up $10 bill and handed it to me. He took the Funko Pop and laughed. No receipt, no change. He walked out and that was the end of it. May and I just talked about the guy and what had happened. Some chills and some laughs. Before we knew it, our shift was over and we began to lock up for the night. We headed out to my car in the parking lot. We talked and it felt like any other regular day where I would drive her home and see her next time that we worked. But this wasn't the same. When we got pretty close to my car, May noticed that there was something on my hood. I didn't see it at first because it looked small from where we were standing. When we came up to the car, I realized what it was, and my heart sank. And I think May's heart did too because of the look on her face. It was the Terminator figurine that the weird man had bought in the store. I picked it up and looked at it. May was freaking out and looking all around the parking lot, trying to find the man. It didn't make any sense to me. How could this guy know which car was mine? I looked up and joined May in looking around the parking lot. And then I noticed this same man standing under one of these street lamps in front of me. It was like something out of a movie because once he saw me look at him, he began walking towards us slowly. I told May to get in the car and she didn't object. We both jumped in and I left the parking lot as fast as my car would go. We were both freaked out and we were trying to figure out what just happened on the drive to her house. Over the next week or so, we talked about it at school, at work, and to each other. We never told anyone because they probably wouldn't have believed us. In high school, I had a stalker. I was 16 and we had met on Facebook. He went to a school nearby and we decided to meet up for a movie. We had a great time together and we ended up dating. The first time he came to my parents' house, he had an ankle monitor on for house arrest, and he wouldn't tell anyone why. Red flag number 1. And since he was a minor, we couldn't find out. My parents obviously didn't allow us to hang out, so we would hang out at his house or around town at the YMCA camp. I was rebellious and naive at the time. Things started to get weird when I noticed his family was pretty odd. One day, we were getting it on in his bedroom and I saw his father looking in through the blinds. I screamed and called him out on it, and his dad ran off. The stalker guy told me that his dad was just into redheads, and he liked to watch us, so this hadn't been the first time. I went to leave and his mom was doing drugs in the kitchen, so I decided it was probably time to break up. This is when it got bad. He started crying and he told me that he's in cancer treatment and that's why he needs me. He doesn't have long to live, blah blah blah. I believed him and told him that we could be friends. And this is when the stalking had started. He switched schools to my high school but never went to class. He would just stand outside of my classroom looking inside until it was a passing period. When I would leave the classroom, he wouldn't address me. He would just follow about 10 to 15 feet behind me to my next period and stand outside the classroom again. I was too intimidated to say something to him. He was about 6'4" and a very heavy-set guy, so I kind of let it happen for weeks. It started to progress to where he would follow me home every day. He would get on the same bus as me, despite living across town, and walk 10 to 15 feet behind me all the way to my house. He would stand outside, just staring up at the window until around the time my parents got home, and then he would just leave. Finally, I told him to screw off and to leave me alone. I told him that we could no longer be friends or acquaintances and to forget about me. However, that escalated things way further. I started getting about 150 calls a night. Half of them were him screaming death threats and in-detail methods on what he wanted to do to me, and the other half were him singing me love songs that he wrote on his guitar. Every time I blocked his number, he seemed to just magically get a new one and leave more messages on that. I woke up one day to see that overnight, he had left me one of those dancing, singing snowmen on my porch. He had stabbed it in the head with a knife and it was still sticking out of it. He had covered it in his liquid deodorant that I had previously mentioned liking the smell of. And I noticed there was a hole where the little song recording device was. When I pressed the hand, it was not the regular Frosty the Snowman song that played. It was his voice singing eerily, "I'm going to have you forever. I'm never going to let you be." I was done at this point and I told my parents, who contacted the school. They suspended him, but he still waited at my bus stop every day and walked to my home with me. One day he ran at me like he was going to tackle me. When I tensed up for the impact, he stopped and hugged me. But it wasn't a regular hug. It was like he was trying to crush me. I was only 5'1" and about 90 pounds at the time, and he ended up cracking one of my ribs. I cried and he started crying too before running off. He left me a voicemail apologizing and saw him later. This one night is the night that I'll never forget, and it's the reason that we got a restraining order and my dad got a gun. I woke up one evening for no reason, just I was fully awake. I got up to go into the kitchen to get a glass of water to relax, and in the reflection of the fridge, I saw movement in my backyard. I couldn't see well because it was so dark outside and so light inside, so I went to the back sliding glass door to get a better look. When I got closer, I was met with the silhouette of a 6'4" man just standing outside the door. Stalker guy was in my backyard, under my room at 3 a.m. He was just staring at me. I yelled at my parents to get up, but he was gone by the time that my dad went outside. There's a patio right outside my bedroom window that goes all the way to the ground, so it's possible that he could have been on top of the patio looking directly into my bedroom window before. We got a restraining order granted shortly after that, and the stalker guy dropped out of my school. I haven't seen him since in person, but every about 6 months he makes a new Facebook and tries to friend request me. I just block and report it every time. Scary stuff. Have you all ever heard of that myth that if you wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, there's likely something looking at you? Well, maybe it's true. First, a bit of context. When I was younger, from my 10-year-old to my 15-year-old age, I'm now 19 by the way, I used to live in a semi-rural area, like small cities with some fields around it. During this time, I used to have a best friend that lived in another city, but still close enough so we could visit each other's houses on our own. Indeed, there was a really long road that crossed both of our cities, and another one farther, and we both lived really close to that road. We used to see each other almost every day, but my friend Alan and I almost never texted each other, because even if I was a lot into social media and stuff, he was the kind of guy that almost never used his phone. So he ended up losing his phone in his home or at a friend's home a lot. So the only time that we really texted each other, it was to warn each other that we weren't able to meet that day. If no one sent anything in the morning or the day before, it meant that we were going to see each other later that day. If the weather wasn't good enough to stay outside, I used to go to his house. He had a lot better video games than I did. The path that I used to take to go to his house was something like 1.5 kilometers, I think. It was the only way possible, because these cities were separated by a river, so we had to pass the bridge to go from a city to another. I will describe you the path so you can imagine it. First, there are a lot of houses, and then only a few houses and a chemical factory on the other side of the road. And then nothing but trees from my side, and still the factory from the other. Then the bridge that is not a really long one because it's not a very big river. On my side, there are two paths to go on both sides of the river, where a few people used to walk or fishing. After the bridge, there is nothing but trees until the end, where there is a warehouse and the street where Alan lives. I had taken this path 1,000 times before with him or my parents, or on our own, even though there isn't a lot of people walking there. It never made me nervous to walk there, even when it started to get dark out. But as I've said earlier, this road connected 3 cities, so usually there were some vehicles driving there. One day, however, something went wrong. This story takes place when I was 13 years old. I was heading to Alan's house, as I do usually, and then when I reached the area with less houses, a white van that was coming from behind me slowed down next to me with the window open. Several times before, lost drivers had asked me or my friends information on where to go, so it didn't really surprise me, and I just watched the man inside of the van. It's been years since this has happened, so I'm not really sure how he looked anymore. I just remember that he was probably in his 30s or 40s, bald with no mustache or a beard. He had a kind of creepy smile, but I didn't pay attention to that, and just waited for him to say something as I kept walking slowly. Since I was walking, he moved too, at my pace so we could talk. "Hello," he said finally. I said hello too, still waiting for a question. "Where are you going?" he asked, smiling and staring at me. I frowned because, of course, this wasn't the type of question that I was waiting for. At this point, I wasn't scared yet, just confused. I asked him why he wanted to know that, and to which he replied, "If you have nothing to do, I can take you for a ride. Would you like that?" And this started to get really weird, and I really wanted to leave because I was starting to get scared now. I chose to lie, thinking that he would leave me alone if he knows that someone was waiting for me. So I said, "Oh, I can't. I'm heading back home and my parents are waiting for me." But of course he didn't leave. He was still smiling and staring at me, driving at my pace. He just said, No, it's okay, we can just do a small drive then. I knew at this point that this man was trying to take me, or worse, but I managed to stay calm and I didn't show him any fear. I insisted. No, but really I can't, I'm already late, I have to hurry up. But it seemed that he really wanted to do whatever he was planning to do to me, and he replied, "Oh, then I'll drive you home. I don't want you to get scolded, but for that you have to give me a kiss." He then leaned closer to the window and formed a kiss with his mouth, waiting for me to kiss him. At this point, we were really close to the bridge, which meant that Alan's house was still a ways away. For some reason, I didn't have the idea to just run around and run for my life to my home or the factory center, so I just kept walking and refused his offer. Of course, he insisted. "Come on, just one, right here." I remember wishing that a car or someone would show up to help me, but the road was deserted this day. He insisted a few more times and I kept saying no, getting more scared every time. Eventually, once we were crossing the bridge, an idea crossed my mind. What I didn't mention earlier is that on the second side of the river, there's a house. It's where the person that takes care of it and their family live. Usually, no vehicle is allowed to go down on the shore, so I thought he wouldn't follow me there if I went there. So I said, "No, really, I don't need you. My home is right there." And I quickly turned on the right to go home. However, that was only a half a smart move, because except for the house, there was nothing but trees and water for almost 3 kilometers. So if there was no one in the house or on the shore, I would have been at his mercy. Like, what if he waited on the bridge and saw that no one would open the door? He could just go down and take me. Luckily, there was a man walking with his dog right next to the house. I ran to him and immediately crouched in front of the dog to pet him, trying to act like if he was my dad or something. Obviously, the man was confused, so I proceeded to explain the entire situation to him. But it turns out that he didn't give a crap and he walked away before I even finished. I watched him leave. He was heading to the bridge and noticed that the van wasn't there anymore. I was relieved but didn't want to go back on the road because I was scared that he was hiding just a bit further, waiting for me. I stayed next to that house for about 2 or 3 minutes, trying to find what to do now when a white van crossed the bridge again. When I saw it, I got terrified, thinking that it was the same guy again. And this van was a really common van with no distinction, so I couldn't tell if it was really him. But they were driving really slowly. It was like they were looking for something. I froze for a few seconds and then ran for my life along the shore, for a long time before jumping into the forest. I ran something like 2 kilometers, and to be honest, I didn't think I was able to run that much. When I finally arrived at Alan's house, it took me 10 minutes to catch my breath. I was shaking and totally exhausted after running for so far. I don't remember why, but instead of knocking at the door, I called him up on his phone. Guess what? That was one of the rare days in the year when he wasn't home, but he forgot to text me in the morning. I stayed by his house for about 2 hours, but I was too scared to go back home because I thought the guy was still on the road. But also, I didn't want to call my parents because I was scared that they would forbid me from going to Alan's house alone again. I eventually came back home, but instead of using the same path, I went through the forest and I walked along the shore for a long time, looking for another bridge to cross the river. My parents still don't know about what happened. I'm going to abstain from giving too much information because this stalker scares the crap out of me. Thankfully, he doesn't read English, so I hope I'll never find this post. Years ago, I moved to follow my boyfriend and to do a PhD in his country. I won't name the place, but it's an across the ocean type of deal. At first, I was very excited. It was a wonderful adventure until it wasn't. It's hard to describe the complexity of what I felt. I felt alone, misunderstood, far from my family and friends, and even though my boyfriend is wonderful, I really felt the weight of not finding any human connection. This could explain why I acted so weird and disconnected from reality in the following story. I'm also a very naive woman, and I like to see the best in people around me. This has been problematic more than a few times, but this story is maybe the worst example of where this candid attitude got me. My boyfriend and I are into a little freaky stuff when we have fun. We do it alone on our own and do not participate in events or anything. I do have an account on a known website for this type of activity. I go there to find new ideas for our sessions, and I sometimes, but rarely, post pictures. No face, no tattoos, and I often wear wigs. I get contacted by interested doms once in a while, even though I clearly state I'm not free. Usually they just send copy-paste messages and I ignore them. Once in a while though, I get a more personal message and make an effort to answer that I'm not interested and that I'm in a relationship already. Well, this is how my discussion with Nick started. He didn't approach me with the "will you be my sub," but with curiosity about how I got into this in the first place, stating that he was quite new to it and was interested in understanding the way of life. And so I gladly explained. Explanations turned into discussions. He told me that he was in the police and that he investigated drug cartels. He also told me that he was married and that he had kids. Interestingly, we had a lot of hobbies in common. A lot. I won't go into details about those hobbies though, but they're kind of specific. Feeling very lonely combined with the fact that I felt I could trust him because he was married and had kids, I accepted his invitation to start texting on WhatsApp. I want to be clear, my boyfriend knew about this from day one. Plus, we had been talking on this website for almost 3 months before switching to WhatsApp. He was very friendly and interested in my day-to-day life. He would share pictures of his kids and of investigations that he was working on. This went on for another 3 months, and then one day he told me that he had to interview a suspect close to the town where I lived, and asked if we could meet up for coffee. I agreed and we met for the first time. Now before anyone panics, my boyfriend was hiking with friends for a few weeks. I texted him but he didn't have any signal. Plus, we have a very trusting relationship. He has a lot of girlfriends, and back in my country I hung out with a lot of boys. This isn't weird for us. And back to this first encounter. It felt as if we had known each other for years. We had a great time from the beginning, and I was so happy that I had found a friend far from my country. He knew I loved reading thrillers and enjoyed murder investigation videos, so he showed me all his gear. Handcuffs, sampling kits for small investigations, other restraints, etc. It didn't feel weird at the moment, but afterwards I kind of understood this could have been a way for him to show off what he could do. However, as the night went on, after grabbing drinks from a nearby bar, he forced me against a wall and he kissed me. I was shocked really, and barely managed to push him off of me. I told him that it was inappropriate, that he was married and that I was in a relationship. He was really sorry and he felt ashamed. He told me that he felt there was something between us, and I was like, yeah, it's called a friendship. I was disappointed and we parted ways. Days later, after he apologized over and over again, he called me to meet up. He wanted to take me for a ride in his hometown, and it's a pretty place. He's got a bike and he wants me to enjoy the scenery in his country that I barely know. I agree, I mean, it's his hometown. He works there and he lives there with his wife and kids. Surely I'll be safe. In short, I wasn't. Again, he kissed me, tried to push for more in the middle of a park. A park where he brought his own kids to play on the weekend. So I told him to bring me back to the bus station so that I could leave. He did, and then proceeded to tell me a story about how he had recently got a drug seller out of hiding by modifying text messages sent by his girlfriend. He basically made him believe she was cheating on him to get him to confront her and then arrested him. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's possible. Due to what had just happened, what I heard was, I can make your boyfriend believe you're cheating on him. And my boyfriend was still on his hike by that time. We did talk once every few days, and I told him everything from the moment that he had some cell signal. Meanwhile, I was confronting Nick about that. His behavior was really strange as he went from, "I'm sorry, I think I'm in love with you," to, "If you tell the cops, who do you think they'll believe? Their colleague or an immigrant?" I got scared and tried to cool things down with him. I just felt that he could go crazy at any moment. He clearly wasn't used to girls refusing him. At that point, I thought it would be safer for me and my boyfriend to maintain contact with Nick, albeit with less enthusiasm than before. But after understanding how obsessed he was, I blocked him from all platforms where I knew he had an account. But he found me. He sent me my address asking if I loved living in that particular part of town. I never gave him my address. I guess he could pull some strings at the station to get my info. He even came to visit me at my job. I was so scared, I just played it off as if everything was okay. I told him that my boyfriend wanted me to cut ties with him because he was angry about what had happened, which was true. But I also wanted him out of my life. I didn't know how he would react if I told him, however. Nick insisted that I loved him, that I could be his mistress, that my boyfriend didn't have to know. He was obsessed by me and he didn't hide it anymore. He told me about how he wanted to screw me, how we would be a great couple, how he would father our kids. He went from I'll be husband material to a piece of crap in a matter of seconds. I refused again and again, blocking him, changing my accounts, etc. I got scared when I got calls from unknown numbers. I was terrified when I saw anyone slowing down on a motorcycle close to my apartment. I was wary of going outside and going to my job. The quarantine was welcomed for me, really, and I didn't get any news from him for months. And then I broke my cell phone. I knew I could transfer all my numbers from one phone to the other, but I didn't know if it would unblock previously blocked numbers. Days later, I got a message from him. He told me that he had divorced his wife and that he still loved me, that he wanted to marry me. He apologized for making me believe I was only mistress material, and that I was so much more than that. He said my boyfriend didn't love me, that I deserved better, that he was waiting for me. When he saw that I saw his message, he said, "Finally, I thought you would never unblock me." Does this mean that he had been sending this message over and over again in hopes that I would finally see it? That narcissistic man used all the manipulation tactics that he knew. He had told me before we met in person how he had learned those skills to toy with criminals, to have them tell the truth and admit to crimes. Fortunately, I had dated manipulative men before and I knew the signs. Basically, he wasn't used to not getting what he wanted. He was attractive, rich, interesting, and he knew that. I blocked him again and we moved a few months later. I just really hope he doesn't get his hand on this information. I believe Nick's last move was trying to hack into my Instagram, as I got a notification that someone from his hometown had tried to connect to my account. Luckily, since then, nothing else has happened. I really hope it stays that way. This happened to me in the summer of 2015. I was dating a guy who lived in the city, and I was living at home at the time in the suburbs. Neither of us had a car, and since I lived at home with my bedroom right next to my grandma's, I always went to him. I would take the subway to his place every week and stay for a couple of days that I had off from work. To get to his apartment required taking 2 trains. One day, I was headed to see him. It was super hot out, and I was wearing a skirt with straps, a crop top, and knee-high socks. Hey, I wanted to look cute. I guess I feel that this is important as I probably stood out in this outfit. And unfortunately, I probably should have been more careful about what I was wearing, which sucks. Anyway, I'm on the first train, and after a few stops, I notice a man get on. I kind of could not notice him as he chose to stand right in front of where I was sitting and stare at me, rather than take an empty seat. It made me feel weird. The man in general just gave off a creepy vibe. He was probably in his 40s, looked unkempt but otherwise kinda just a basic looking white dude, whose face I can't even picture now. So I get off at the last stop and head through the station to where I need to catch the second train. But I noticed that guy is following me, which at first I figured wasn't a very big deal. He could have just been going to the same place. So, to get to the platform, I needed to have to go up some stairs and to realize that he was right behind me again. I decided to turn around and go to a different platform, which happened to be packed with people, thinking that if he follows me then, this is bad but maybe I can lose him in the crowd. He follows me and I try to duck out of view before going back to the actual platform I needed to be waiting on. I get there and for a few minutes I feel better, until I see him again. He must have known that I would be here after I had gone up there and then turned around. Plus, it was the only other platform most likely he saw me the whole time. There weren't too many people waiting compared to the other side, but a few trains came that were so full, I didn't bother to try and get on and neither did he. The whole time I'm texting my boyfriend who was not taking me seriously at all. I ask him at least if he can meet me at the station when I get to the stop by his apartment. It was only a 5-minute walk, and he was being reluctant, but he finally agreed. At this point though, I was still waiting for a train. One comes that's very full, but I'm getting restless and I want to get to a safe place, so I squeeze on and so does the man right next to me with his arm over me. I decide that even with all these people around, I'm not safe. So right before the doors close, I hop out, and the train leaves with the guy on it staring at me as it pulled away. I waited for a few more trains to come and go, worried the guy would be waiting for me at the next stop or something. I got a train finally, paying attention to everyone who got on at each stop. The guy never did, and I made it to my stop and greeted my boyfriend, who seemed put out by having to walk over. He's an ex-boyfriend and generally not the best person. I'm really proud of myself for getting off that train at the last second. I don't know how much danger I was in, but I know that man was following me, and definitely wasn't for any wholesome reason. And despite being in public, I feel like if he had tried anything, no one would have done anything, and I'm a very small and I'm not very strong. Luckily, I never saw the guy again, and that day will only be a reminder of what could have happened. Two years ago, I was the last person left in my college apartment before the winter holidays. I had a final the next morning, a short shift at work, and then I was headed home. Because of this, I was awake at around 3 in the morning watching TV and studying. Out of nowhere, I hear this pounding on the front door. This is very, very odd. I'm the only one left out of 4 girls in the apartment. Most of the complex is gone because they had finished finals early, and I live on the top third floor of the building closest to the main office. I sneak up to answer the door, wondering if it's one of my roommates. My room is the closest to the front door, so it's all of 3 steps to peek through the peephole in the door. There are about 5 people outside, 4 guys and 1 girl. All of the men were shirtless and some of them were wearing shorts. It was about 20 degrees outside and snowing. Most of them were hanging back on the walkway, but the man who was knocking on the door was bent over it, one arm up against the door and leaving his other hand free to just pound on it. I heard them talking, but I couldn't make out any words. For some reason, the girl unnerved me the most. Let's recap. 3 in the morning, mostly empty apartment complex, 5 people shirtless, banging repeatedly on my door, all while it's snowing. Needless to say, I just pretended I wasn't even there, even though I stood watching them through the peephole. I think I ran off to mute my TV just in case. They stayed there for about 5 minutes while the one guy just knocked away, but they finally left and headed farther down the walkway. I still have no idea what they were on about, and I didn't sleep very well that night. I was a 17-year-old student in France when all of this happened. I was living in an apartment next to my college's campus with 2 roommates. Let's call them Alex and Polly. I was coming back from my class at around 5:30 p.m. when I saw a guy waiting in front of our building. It was the kind of old building where you can enter without ringing. It was a big residence, so I just walked by him without really caring about why he was there. 15 minutes later, the same guy came up to my apartment. He pretended that he was one of Alex's friends, and that he was waiting for him, but Alex was late. He also told me the exact place where Alex was doing an internship at the time and even told me about his schedule for the day. With all the information that he gave me, I was confident that they knew each other, so I let him in. For the record, Alex's father used to work for a big company at the time, so even by looking it up on the internet, it was impossible to find anything about him. As a good host, I offered him something to drink and started talking with him while waiting for Alex. The conversation quickly turned to darker when he started to tell me about his past and about the amount of weapons he was keeping at his home in France. Around here, it really is unusual to have a gun at home, except if you are a hunter or in a profession that requires one. It was getting late, and as the conversation got darker, I started to feel uncomfortable with him, so I decided to send a text to Alex just to let him know that his friend was here, and that I wasn't really feeling comfortable with him. Alex answered me a few minutes later asking me to send a picture of his friend, just to see who was here. So I took my phone out and discreetly took a picture of the person in front of me. After receiving it, Alex just told me that he was on his way home. When Alex arrived, I was relieved. He came into the living room and said hello to his friend, but then he just sat down and an awkward silence came along with it. After about a minute, I received a text from Alex telling me, "I don't know this guy." At that moment, I thought he was joking around, but after seeing his face, I knew that he was serious. So here we are. 2 young college students stuck with a stranger that apparently knows a lot about Alex without even meeting him. We were both really young at the time and we didn't really react in a good way. Every human being in this kind of situation would have called the police or asked him to leave, but we were really lost and didn't know about it. And we were scared of his reaction if we would have asked him to leave, so we thought, hey, let's eat early so he'll feel uncomfortable about not being invited for dinner and he'll leave. But as we were dining in the kitchen, he just stayed in the living room and started to watch TV without even asking us. At the same time, our third roommate Polly just came home from work. She entered the apartment and said hi to the guy in the living room before joining us in the kitchen. She then asked who he was and wasn't really happy when we told her we didn't have any idea of who he was or how to make him leave. We explained to her our dumb strategy of just living our life until he felt uncomfortable, and then he would leave. And she started to act with us and just tell us about her day. At that moment, Polly was going through a rough period and was telling us about it. Not a really fun story to tell or listen to, but while she was telling us about her misery, the guy in the living room joined us in the kitchen and started laughing about Polly's story before going back to watch TV. It was really creepy. At this moment, Alex had enough and asked us to leave the apartment while he was going to deal with the guy. And this is what happened when we left. Alex got back to the living room and started to act like he was about to go to bed. Another dumb strategy, yes I know. His room was opening on the living room, so he had told the guy that he was about to go to bed and left the door half opened while starting to remove his jewelry. He noticed that the guy on the couch wasn't moving, or caring about the fact that there was no one left in the apartment except Alex that was in his room. Alex went up to him and told him that maybe it was time for him to leave as he was his friend and that he was going to sleep, but the guy replied to him, "I'm waiting for the girls." Alex got mad and finally put him out of the apartment. At the same time, Polly and I were going back in the building and met the guy on the stairs. He wished us a good night with a creepy smile and he left. Going back to the apartment, Alex told us what happened and we started to ask ourselves, who was that guy? How did he know Alex's name and surname? How did he know where he was and his working schedule? How did he find our address? We spent a part of the night trying to find answers without any success. We learned from our mistakes and decided to never open the door again to someone that we didn't know. 2 weeks later, Polly was chilling in her room and she was home alone. Her window was giving a view on the parking lot, and as she was looking through it, she saw a red car parking. The guy was back. Polly got the very good idea to note his license plate and to verify that the door was locked. The guy came up to the apartment and told Polly the exact same thing that he had told me the first time he came. Polly got mad and told him that if he was still there in 5 minutes, that she would call the police. It was the last time that he came. A few weeks later, Alex came back home after work telling us that he finally remembered where he already had met the guy. So here's the story. Alex used to go to a bar where you were able to play video games while drinking. Apparently the guy was in the same bar at the machine next to him and tried to talk to Alex, but he was too focused on his game and only took the time to tell him a quick hello. Well, that guy probably followed Alex around for a week or two after that day. We moved out of the apartment a few months after this story. Luckily, I haven't seen the guy since then. I want to start off by saying that I'm a stay-at-home mom. A very stay-at-home loner mom, and with my family so far away, it didn't feel right to have them worry. I just wanted to tell my story, whether someone reads it or not, it doesn't really matter. I'm not a writer by any means, and this was just my thoughts and a recap of my night. Tonight, I tucked my oldest kid into bed and on my way out to the new nightly ritual of feeding my neighbor's cat, my husband made a joke about wanting corn dogs from 7-Eleven. I don't get out much and don't mind, so I said we needed milk anyways and we went on our way. The neighbors were uneventful, except for one cat hooked her nail into my middle finger when I was giving her treats. Because of this, I left earlier than usual and headed straight to the store. It was just after 9 p.m. and I pulled up to the 7-Eleven, parking alongside the side of the building, unobstructed windows spanning the entire length of the building, and it's well lit. I immediately noticed a gentleman in blue standing up on the sidewalk. I pay no mind but start gathering my things. My finger still really hurts though. I'm taking my time and cursing that gorgeous cat when I hear a man's voice mumble something. My window was partially open, but my windshield is already fogging up, and when I look up to see that he's walking towards my passenger side, he starts trying to open the door, but thank God my kids have broke that door handle and it won't open. I immediately step out of my car, and with me standing in my open door, looking out across the windshield, I say, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" And he starts saying over and over, "Are you yellow cab? Are you yellow cab?" And I say again, "I don't know you. I'm not letting you in my car." He realizes that he can't get in and people are watching, so he starts to walk away from my car and I run inside. I'm a little shaken up, but I try to sum it up to mistaken identity. We live in a small town and our cabs are just random cars. I'm walking around and trying to make sure that he isn't near my car, and at one point, I see him looking like he's walking away. I call my husband and tell him a little bit of what happened, just to hear him say it's probably nothing. Corn dogs in hand, I walk out and head towards my car. Visions of this guy in my backseat flashing through my head. I see him walking away from my car, but now he has a backpack. Something flashes on the side of the pack and it hits me. I didn't lock my door when I ran inside. This POS has my 5-year-old son's backpack. I thought they might bowl, but he started walking back towards me instead. I said again, "That's my son's backpack," and he again starts saying, "Are you yellow cab? Are you yellow cab?" I yell louder, "That's my son's backpack, give me it back." For a millisecond, I even considered the fact that this might not be my son's backpack and I panic. But I'm convinced the moment that I see the bus pass. This man is still going on about yellow cab and I looked at him furious. Mama Bear was upset. I take an extra long look at what he was wearing. Hospital blue pajama pants and a deep but vibrant blue hoodie, with a WOT logo and the O at some hemisphere lines of something in it. All of this happens in a few seconds and I just remember looking at him, upset, and telling him that he's asked for stealing a little kid's backpack and that he should get out of here. Maybe it's because I live in Canada, or maybe it was because I didn't leave the area where I could be seen, but he started walking away. I went inside immediately and told the clerks, but I don't think any of us knew what to do. For a second, I wasn't going to call the cops. It's just a backpack. But I just couldn't help but think about him trying to get into my car with me in it, so I did call the police. I started telling them what was happening, and then I saw the guy again. I followed him while I was on the phone and I parked way ahead of him. And time passed quickly when you're on the phone with the cops and the guy passed by my car. He turns back and sees that it's me and turns around. I haven't turned off my car, so I panic, but I shift into drive and start driving away. The man wasn't scared. He was actually walking back to my car. As I'm driving away, I tell the officer, "What the F I was thinking, this is so dangerous. I gave you his description and his general location, I'm going home." We finished the conversation on the way and I gave them my info and the guys. I don't know why I followed him. I follow a lot of true crime and I guess I just could not report a man trying to get into my car. I told the police the same. I got off the phone and I went inside. My husband is good at pointing out people's hardships, and it is clear this man had mental health issues, and I suppose some addiction issues. He was rather thin with large scabs on his face. He kind of dumbed down how I feel about it, and I think that's why I wanted to write this. What happened, it scared me, and I don't know why I did what I did. All of it seems pretty stupid. I approached the guy and I drove after him. God, I'm ridiculously slow sometimes. I did get the backpack back, but it was stupid. I received a phone call 5 minutes before I started writing this and the police had got in. He's got to the station for the night because he is extremely intoxicated. The officer's words. We pulled up with our lights on and he asked if we were a yellow cab. A part of me feels like maybe he was just a drunk or something, but a part of me thinks this guy was using that as an excuse to why he would be thinking to get into my car. I definitely had an adrenaline rush and now I'm just kind of tired. Thanks for reading. It was a weird night. When I was in 7th grade, about 13 years old, I was going through some crazy stuff. My mom had cancer and my parents were getting divorced, so I started my rebellious phase. I was depressed and wanted to feel something, so I would sneak out all the time. I would say maybe once a week at least. I would walk to my then boyfriend's house about 15 minutes away, or to the 7-Eleven down the street, or wherever there was a lake nearby my mom's condo that I would sometimes walk to. Whenever friends came over to spend the night, we would all sneak out together. This could be fun. One time I walked to my boyfriend's house with my friend and his dad caught us. So he drove us home, but he didn't tell my mom. Just a lot of fun times. However, one time I snuck out with a different friend. We'll call her Mary. Mary was not from my town and we had met through a youth group at her church. She was very sweet and fun. A little bit of a dork and loved makeup. She came over one night and we watched scary movies until late, and then we snuck out through my back door. We decided to head to 7-Eleven to get some caffeinated drinks. It was probably about midnight or even later. Now, on our way to the store, we were walking on the sidewalk and I saw a man stumbling over his own feet, heading in our direction. Mary got freaked out by this, so we crossed to the other side of the street. There were no issues after that, and we kept on walking. As we got closer to the 7-Eleven, that's when things started getting a bit more freaky. Mary had the same feeling of anxiety as we had approached. The street was well lit and there was one car in the parking lot, but nobody was inside of the store, not even the cashier. This was scary to us, as we were very young at the time and thought maybe there was someone inside waiting for us. We waited outside for a few minutes, but nobody came to the counter, so we didn't feel safe going inside. We decided to head home instead. As we were leaving the parking lot, an older woman swerved in front of us and rolled down her window. She asked what we were doing outside. We lied and told her that we were on a walk and that our mom knew that we were there. We had our cell phones in case of an emergency, but the woman would not let up. She asked if we needed a ride home, and when both of us declined, she insisted. She asked us to get in the car, said that she had water, snacks, and anything to get us into the back seat. She was alone in the car and she was older, not elderly but maybe in her 50s. We kept saying no until we realized that she was not going to drive away, so we just walked away instead. We stayed on the sidewalk and headed back to my condo. On our way back, Mary looked behind us to see the older woman drive past in her car, staring us down. For us, this was a very frightening encounter and it gives me the creeps to remember it. I'm 18 now, but I still get worried when I sneak out sometimes. Just remember, never trust strangers. Luckily, this was the last time that I saw this woman. Mary moved away a few months later. And an additional part that I originally forgot. On our way to 7-Eleven, we saw a security car drive by and had to hide in the bushes. My money fell out of my pocket while I was lying on the ground. This was the only time I had seen security in my neighborhood, so this night in general was just a strange sequence of unfortunate or unsettling events. As I'm writing this, it's been a few hours since this has happened to me and my friends, but I'm still a bit shaken up, but hopefully writing this up will help me calm down a bit. For a bit of background, I am currently 19 and live in Canada. Being a young male with long hair and some discernibly native features, I've grown used to the occasional needlessly hostile cop or security guard. Just a part of life. However, most of the time those encounters don't escalate very far. and have always happened in some other part of the city, so I never thought something like this would happen. It was a little after 1 a.m. and I was hanging out with two of my friends, Joey and Rick. We were hanging out at my house initially, however, my parents had gone to bed and we didn't want to wake them up, so we decided to go out for a drive. We ended up going out to our old high school and chilled in the parking lot while listening to music. It's a relatively safe and well-lit area, so we didn't reckon anything bad would happen. While there, we joined a Discord call with some of our friends who were out of town for university, having a good time when I noticed a big white pickup truck pull into the parking lot. Right off the bat, I knew that something was wrong. Most of the people that come into these parking lots to hang out are all around our age, and not many teenagers drive a truck this nice and big. I tapped Joey on the shoulder and tell him that we should leave. Before he had time to react though, the truck pulls up right behind our car and it blocks us in. Inside was a relatively normal looking white guy, maybe about 30 with some stubble and a Hurley hat on. We see him roll down his window and gesture for us to roll ours down. Not knowing what else to do, Joey complied. The guy then pulled up on our driver's side and identified himself as a cop who just had finished his shift and wanted to know what we were doing out this late. Joey explained that we were just hanging out, listening to music. The guy nodded and said that he just wanted to make sure we weren't doing anything bad, and then he drove off. After that, all things went back to normal. We didn't think much of it, and we were relieved that it wasn't anything worse. Joey joined the Discord call again, and all was normal. And then maybe 10 minutes later, I realized this guy has been driving back and forth down the street near the parking lot watching us. Suddenly, he comes flying into the parking lot, turning on his high beams as he slams on the brakes maybe 2 stalls away from where we were parked on our driver's side. Afterwards, he proceeded to park at an angle partially blocking us in, and then rolling down his window, visibly very angry as he started yelling at us. My initial reaction was to start filming, but unfortunately, my phone had died a few minutes prior. Never let your phone go below 10% while in public. If something happens, you'll be glad to have it on you. So Joey rolls down his window, and as he does, we hear the guy yell, "You guys have to leave, get the heck out of here right now." Joey nods and says something along the lines of, "All good. Can I see your badge?" The man exhaled loudly before reaching down and pulling out his badge, and a gun which was pointed right at Joey. Thankfully, he set both items down right after, but it was clearly another very blatant attempt at intimidation. In hindsight, we probably should have asked for his badge number, but the sight of a firearm had us frozen. After this, he went back in his tirade, yelling something along the lines of, "Get the heck out of here before I call my on-duty friends to come mess you guys up." So we tell him that we'll leave. Before he goes flying off, he yells something along the lines of, "Don't be dummies. Quit doing crappy things like this." Needless to say, we ended up leaving after that. We just ended up going back to Joey's house and cooling off a bit before he drove me and Rick home. This is the first time that I've had an incident with a cop or security guard where I really felt that I was in danger. It's also worth noting that unless otherwise posted, this parking lot is designated as free for public use outside of school hours, and we didn't have the music on very loud either, so he had no real reason to ask us to leave in the first place. I'm unsure of whether or not I'll be filing a complaint. I would very much like to do one both to get even and ensure that he's unable to do something like this again. However, there is no anonymous way to file a complaint on an officer in my city, and I know that a complaint could escalate the situation into some god-awful legal case, and it may be best for me to simply take the lesson from this situation and to move on. I was returning home from an afternoon of shooting my new shotgun that I just bought. I stopped to get some dinner at Wingstop and parked in a parking lot right in front of the store that had an all-glass front and looked directly into the parking lot. not more than 20 yards away where you could see my vehicle. Seemed pretty safe, right? Not thinking anything of it, I left my shotgun in the back in its case where it was visible. You could not see the firearm itself though, but you could certainly see that it was a rifle of some kind, due to the shape of the bag, and also I had a duffel bag next to it. Anyways, I go in and eat some dinner, have a couple of beers, and I'm pretty content. I walk outside and I see this sketchy dude in the parking lot just kind of walking around, specifically around my vehicle, kind of looking around, just a general sketchy body language, and I immediately got a bad feeling. It was kind of a poorer area of town and there were some weird people in this little city that I'm in, so I just put my paranoia to the back of my mind and think that maybe this guy is going to ask me for money or something. As I approach my vehicle, he sort of turns around and walks off a bit, but still close to my car. Still not thinking much of it, I keep alert just in case. I step inside my vehicle and put the key in the ignition and I turn it on. All the while, I see this guy out of my peripheral standing at my passenger window. And I think that it's pretty weird that he's still standing there. And I'm thinking that he's going to tap on my window to ask me for money or for a ride. Nope. This guy opens my car door as soon as I put it in drive. I didn't want to wait to find out what he was doing or what he had wanted. I peeled out of the parking lot like a bat out of hell, door opened and all. Someone honking at me not knowing some freaking creep tried getting into my vehicle to do God knows what. I called the police and gave a description of the suspect along with the location. I'm pretty sure that guy was going around looking in cars and saw what I had in my backseat and noticed my gun. And when he couldn't get in because it was locked, figured that he would wait around for me to return it and hold me up. Thank God I had locked the door, otherwise my firearm would have been stolen and used in who knows what kind of crime, and it could have came back on me. I learned a couple of lessons from this. Do not leave anything valuable visible inside your car, even if you think that it's totally safe, because it's a public place with a lot of visibility. Also, don't leave firearms in your car, besides a glove box that is locked. I was seriously an idiot for leaving it out of the open in the case like that. I just didn't think about it in that way until tonight. Next, follow your gut. I knew something was up as soon as I saw this guy. If I would have completely written it off as just some weirdo, who knows if I would have had the awareness and instinct to immediately take off. Lock your doors as soon as you get in. This occurred to me when I entered my car, that I really ought to have locked them. For some reason I didn't though. Maybe I really didn't think someone would make an attempt like that, or I don't know why I didn't. But that little mistake could have turned into a big one really quick. Get a concealed carry permit. This is as close a call as I need to be convinced that I need a permit, and classes on how to use pistols effectively and safely for self-defense. Not taking any chances. Ladies, please be careful. Creeps like this are more inclined to prey on women. And I know this guy was probably hoping a poor defenseless young lady would have stepped into that car. I thought he looked frustrated when I walked out and he saw me walking towards my car. All in all, be careful out there. This is my second posting that happened after the bus incident. I actually bought a car right after the bus incident. I had a car loan to pay off, but I was so shook up after that I decided it was worth it. Unfortunately, I'm an idiot and decided one night in the middle of the night that I needed to grab something from Walmart. I don't remember what time, and at this point, I don't even remember what I even went in to get, but I do remember that I was getting out of my car, and I saw a rusted vehicle pull up to the front of the building. The larger person in the driver's seat kind of shoved some skinny disheveled looking late teen to early 20-year-old out of the car and was kind of aggressively ordering him to do something and drove off. I also saw the teenager look at me and I closed my door and scurried into the store. I had kind of a do not involve me mentality. I didn't know what they were doing, I just didn't want to be involved. This only lasted for a few minutes. I had immediately gone into the women's clothing section because I wanted to be further away from the entrance when he came in. But dang if that obvious drug addict didn't immediately run up to me. I can be naive but not completely sheltered. As soon as he opened his mouth, I knew he was going to ask me for money, and money is a pet peeve of mine. I work hard and I make very little money. I was lifting boxes of product, assembling furniture, having to take a bus with crazy people. Before I had a car, and if I missed that bus, I would have to walk miles to get home. I realized at this point that the person who dropped him off ordered him to get money some way or another, and I was annoyed. I could see him preparing himself to try and look pitiful and opening his eyes wide to look innocent. I guess he didn't understand how insincere he looked right off the bat and was like, "Ma'am, can I ask you?" No. I immediately cut him off. I didn't want to hear whatever lie he was about to tell me. He tried a few more times, got mad and stalked off, pissed at me. He found the lady working in the changing rooms and I could hear him talking to her in the same insincere tone, complaining about me to gain some sympathy. "Ma'am, you won't believe how rude this..." She cut him off and I heard her call out on the radio very loudly, "Security, come get this guy out of here." I heard him pleading with her and her yelling at him for a minute and security came to escort him out. It was funny at that moment and I thought that it was over. I went about my business and checked out and I was about to step out when I suddenly had a thought. The guy's mad at me and he knows where I parked, and his ride drove over leaving me there. So that guy is still out there. There were only 4 cars in the parking lot, mine with 2 cars next to it and one a row after mine. I thought that I was overreacting, but I felt like it was a bad idea to go out there alone. I stood there for a few minutes contemplating getting security to walk me out when I heard someone getting checked out, and I looked to see that it was a very well put together tall man who seemed nice, so I waited and asked him to walk me to my car. He was from the car the row after mine. He didn't mind at all, so I walked with him to my car, locked the door and he walked to his. I really thought that I had overreacted. I thought that I was being paranoid. Until I pulled out and drove past those 2 cars next to me to leave and I saw the young man uncrouched from between the 2 cars next to mine and walk off. I stopped going out alone after that night, and I started keeping my pepper spray in my hands in parking lots if I did. I'm a senior in high school and it was a Friday night around 6 p.m. and I had just gotten out of my drama class. As usual, my mom worried that anything could happen at such an hour, and then came with her car to fetch me. Sometimes on Friday, we would take this opportunity to go to the supermarket near my high school, and that's what we did tonight. Since my feet hurt after the whole 2 hours of drama class spent standing up, I stayed in the car. The other reason why I stayed in that car is that I would love to sing my songs when nobody was around, because I could shout and the sound was muffled. It was like I was in my own little personal space. By reflex, I locked all the car doors and waited for my mom to enter the shop to begin to sing some random stuff that I was into at the time. Some people will look at me, but that's okay. I don't really care anyway. And then I see a man, probably in his mid-50s, wearing a big black coat and a gray beanie. He was watching me as he walked in front of my car. I look elsewhere, not really wanting to make eye contact. I just saw him smile at me when I looked away. I don't think much of it as he walks past my passenger door, the one side where I was sitting at. As I hear the sound of a car handle being pulled with force, my blood ran cold. It was the sound of the handle on my door, the passenger door. The man continued without looking behind. It dawned on me. The only reason that he couldn't open it was because I had locked everything up. What would have happened if I didn't? I don't know, but with the smile that creep sent to me, I believe that it wouldn't have been nice. Moral of the story: always lock your doors even if you stay in your car. It can happen to anyone to stumble upon a creep, even on a parking lot at 6 p.m. with witnesses around. This past New Year's Eve, I went away for the night with my two best friends and one of their moms. I am posting now because I recently discovered this place. I was home for the holidays from college, and my friend Sarah had invited me to go to Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's with her mom and our friend Rachel. I didn't have any other plans, so I decided to go with them. We went to a cool city about an hour from where we lived that is big on shopping and resorts. We planned to have a pretty calm night, watch the ball drop at a block party thing downtown, have a few drinks at the bar. Since we're on the West Coast, the ball drop is at 9. So at around 8, we ventured from our hotel, walking to the block party about a mile away. On the way, we passed a very lively bar, so we decided to stop by and spent about 15 minutes dancing, but we didn't get any drinks there. It was a gay bar, and Sarah and Rachel, being gay, they were pretty stoked on it, and they wanted to come back after the ball dropped, even though it was about 90% men there. We continued on to the block party and get some dinner, a glass of champagne. The ball dropped and they had a DJ, so we spent about an hour there dancing too. After we got tired of it, we decided to head back to the bar and hang out there until midnight. Once we get there, Sarah's mom pays for a drink for each of us, but leaves soon after that because she was tired. It was about 10:30 at this point, and Sarah, Rachel, and I were enjoying our drinks and having fun. Rachel tried some of my drinks since it was one that she hadn't had before. Now I constantly have my guard up when I'm drinking in public, and I felt safe at this bar because I assumed none of the men were interested in us. I went back to the bar to get a second drink, and that's the last thing that I remember. The rest I've gathered from Sarah and Rachel. Almost immediately after getting my second drink, I asked Rachel to go to the bathroom with me because I wasn't feeling well, even though I was completely fine 10 minutes before that. Once in the bathroom, I just collapsed on the floor and I was almost unresponsive. Rachel, now worried, somehow dragged my half-lifeless body out to where Sarah was waiting for us. Security, seeing my condition and assuming that I was wasted, asked for us to leave. Sarah and Rachel decided to take me back to the hotel about half a mile away. By this point, I was unconscious and there were barely any sounds escaping from my mouth. They saw someone leave the bar at the same time as us, who was walking near us, but they were preoccupied with trying to keep my lifeless body off the ground. At one point, I threw up all over myself, the both of them and the sidewalk. And the next part of the story we had to get from Sarah, and Rachel doesn't have any memory of this. Still struggling to carry me, the man they saw leave the bar approached them. He was hitting on Rachel, trying to get her to go grab a drink with him. She was very agitated and told him to leave, and that her friend needed help right now. He didn't take no for an answer, and he continued to follow us down the street, asking if they wanted to get drinks with him, if he could help carry me and such. A middle-aged woman witnessing this came up and told the man to leave. Something along the lines of, "Stop harassing these young women or I'm going to call the police," and he left after that. Next, by some miracle, an EMT and his wife, enjoying the holiday, ran into us on the street. He checked me out to make sure that something wasn't majorly wrong, and then he carried me the rest of the way to my hotel and into the room, since my friends could barely hold me up. They thanked him profusely and him and his wife left. This is where Rachel's memory kicks back in. 5 minutes later, they get a knock on the door and it's the EMT and his wife again. They came to let us know that a man had followed us to the hotel, and that they just saw him hop the gate and start to make his way to our room. My friends called hotel security, but they were unable to find him. My friends didn't get a glimpse of him, but I'm sure that it was the same man from earlier. I spent the rest of the night vomiting everything in my body and dry heaving after that. I woke up the next morning in a pile of pillows and blankets on the bathroom floor. My last memory was at the bar getting a second drink, and my friends filled me in on everything that had happened. Feeling like crap, I thought that I must have drank too much, but I had never blacked out before in my life. And the amount of drinks that I had, 2 in 2 hours, since I didn't get to drink my second at the bar, didn't add up to me being completely unconscious. We decided that my first drink had to have been drugged, since Rachel had some of it and had no memory of our walk home, even though she was fully functional. I'm sure the man that was talking to Rachel and then followed us back was the one that had slipped something into my drink. To this day, I don't really know how I could have been slipped something. I got my drink from the bar and I never set it down. My best guess was that it was already in the cup. Thankfully, I have a good friend and kind strangers protecting me that night. It keeps me up at night thinking about what could have happened under different circumstances. This story takes place when I was around 16 or 17. I lived with just my dad in a little apartment in a questionable area. It was the type of area that you wouldn't want to be out and about when the sun goes down. Up until a certain time, like 10 or 11 p.m., there would be a cop or two in the area patrolling and making sure that no bad activities were going on. I had a job at a restaurant in the city, which was about a 30-minute car ride and an hour-and-a-half train ride from my house. The train was a couple of blocks away from my place, and since my dad was always too lazy or hungover to drive me, that was my main form of transportation. I went to work at around 3 p.m. and would usually get home at around 12 or 1. This was my schedule 4 days a week aside from having school. I would see a lot of familiar faces on the train because of this, but we never really made conversation with each other. Until one night when I got out of work late because some idiot wanted to sit in the restaurant past closing. Thanks to them, I missed my train, and the next one wasn't scheduled to arrive for another hour. So, having nowhere to go and no money for Lyft or Uber, I sat there waiting. No one was around me when this older man showed up, kind of staggering a bit. I assumed he was another drunken hobo in the city, trying to catch a train to sleep in. Something about his face gave me a deja vu, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe that I had just seen him on the train here or there. He made his way over to me to my discomfort and started up a conversation. He wasn't slurring, but the way that he was looking down at me gave me goosebumps. He asked me why I was out there so late all by myself. I had to reply as to not anger him, but I mean, we were alone and he was close enough to me to pull out a knife or something. Anyway, I told him that I was waiting for the train and he asked which one. Now, the train was color-coded with a strip at the top to indicate where it goes to north, south, east, or west. I took blue, but I lied and said that I took green. He looked at the schedule above it and saw that the green train was coming in 15 minutes. So he said that he would keep me company. For those extremely long 15 minutes, he asked me how long I had been working at so-and-so restaurant, and this made my blood run ice cold. I never told him where I worked. I just looked at him very timidly and answered, "For a year," and he laughed and he said, "Wow, it's already been a whole year, huh?" At this point, my skin was itching out of anxiety, and as soon as the green train came, I knew that I had no choice but to take it. I said goodbye to him and I thanked him for the chat, hoping that that would be the end of it. But nope. He suddenly told me that he took the green train too. So he followed me and sat in a seat behind me. My mind was racing about whether he was going to try and do something to me, like chloroform me or hurt me in some other way. But we rode the train in silence. I was trying to figure out how I was going to lose him. There weren't too many people riding the train at that hour, and our car was empty, unfortunately. As the ride went on in a menacing silence, I could feel him staring down the back of my head. I waited until we got to a stop where there was another person, and I was so relieved to see a woman sitting there. She wasn't boarding, so I immediately got off the train and the man followed me, as expected. And I took a seat on a bench next to hers, close enough to her to see and hear everything going on, hoping that she would catch on. The man noticed that I was sniffling, allergies, and being out in the cold, and asked if I was sick. I told him no, but he insisted on giving me these weird pills he had that were supposedly cold medicine. I declined in a louder voice. "Sorry, I don't accept pills from strangers." This prompted the lady to look at us, and I made eye contact with her. She knew now. Now this went on until a blue train came and the lady got up, giving me a look that told me to get on with her. So without explanation, I did. She waved me over to sit next to her, and when the man tried to follow, she said, "No, you go sit over there," and made him sit a couple of seats across from us. He chose the one where he could face us, and he stared at us the whole time. I was shaking and about to burst into tears. The woman leaned over and whispered to me that she had a pistol. I felt safer with her there. We whispered back and forth about what had happened. I told her where I lived and how I was worried that he would follow me home. She told me a friend of hers would be boarding the train soon, and when he did, she told me that his name was Ray. Ray was filled in about everything and agreed to escort me home. She promised that I could trust him. The two of them waited with me until I got to my stop. The man, still watching me, started to smile wildly, resembling the Cheshire Cat. He shouted, "This is your place, right?" To which I didn't respond and just gave the woman a hug and thanked her. Ray and I hurriedly hopped off the train, and as I looked back, I saw that the woman had pulled out her pistol and told the man to sit back down, even blocking the exit with her body. I finally let myself cry in relief. Ray walked me home and tried to calm me down by telling me about his job and his family. After watching me get inside the gates of my apartment safely, I thanked him profusely for his help. It chills me to think about how that night would have turned out if I hadn't met up with that woman and her friend. I feel extremely lucky to this day. I never saw that man again, and eventually, I stopped thinking about him, but in the back of my head, that creepy, aroused smile of his was burned into my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder just what else he knew about me. This happened yesterday after I had finished the night shift at around 3 a.m. I work at a store of a big fast food chain to pay for my university. Our staff changes frequently because of a lot of students and people working at our place, so you don't get to know each other very well. Everybody has their own social life, and it is very, very rare for coworkers to establish friendships outside of working hours. But still, you know the people on your shift in the night shift has particularly few workers. One of my workers, Jazir, started to get interested in me. Not that I noticed. I'm young and dumb and like being friendly, and it's important for later. Have a hard time saying no. In December of 2019, our store threw a Christmas party at a pub. I went and had a great time, but I also made plans for later that night. Because of that, I wanted to leave early, which made Jazir also want to leave early despite the fact that he needed nor planned it beforehand, which made me uncomfortable. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to get to the train station and I did, so I couldn't say no and I just let him tag along. When we arrived at the train station, it came to light that there was no train that he could take to get home. None. He didn't check beforehand. He did not ask me. He had wanted to tag along with me, that's it. Super uncomfortable. Instead of taking the train to the main station, he got into my train and only got out when I insisted that he changes trains at another big station. But oh boy, that was not the train of the title. In January of 2020, Jazir asked me out for coffee and I agreed. I thought, he just wants to be friends. He doesn't have any and can only rely on his coworkers. If something happens, I can just nope out of there. And so I went. First, it was okay-ish. We mostly talked about work-related stuff, because we don't share any hobbies. We are not the same age and we don't have the same mother tongue. Jazir didn't like talking about work and nothing more. He started talking about how different I was from other coworkers, how nice of a person that I am and how good my charisma is. And then he asked if we could get to know each other better. I genuinely didn't want to and still don't. Jazir is not my type, neither as a person nor from his looks. Especially his looks, even if I sound superficial. While I'm in my early 20s, Jazir is at least in his early 30s. I have no problem with age gaps. It's a story for another time. But I am not attracted to men that like teenagers. Instead of telling Jazir a straight no, I told him that I was not interested in having a boyfriend. He didn't take me seriously and he told me that he would change my mind. I told him that he wouldn't. He again was not really on board with that opinion, so I elaborated my opinions 3 times in German and 1 time in English to get it very clear. He always changes to English if he does not get something or he thinks he misunderstood, even if he had heard it clearly and just didn't like it. I mean, obviously my opinion is going to change if I explain it in English rather than German. We left the conversation with him still not convinced and me being really not interested in a second meeting. He quit soon after and I foolishly assumed that I was free. But whenever he came to my workplace to place an order, he would ask me out to eat something, and every time I would postpone it with whatever I had said the last time. Because of finals, because of travel, because of anything I could get my hands on. Then came everything with the pandemic that hit Germany in March and I didn't see him anymore. I blocked him on social media in April and hoped that that was the last thing to happen. But oh boy, that was not the case. Today, I finished my shift at 3 a.m. and left with my female and other coworker to catch the next train. We take different trains and so we decided to wait in the main lobby until we needed to go to my platform. In that time, Jazir approached. He had just finished his shift and was on his way home. My friend asked him which train he needed to get on and he said that he was walking home. While the conversation went on, I got closer to my friend to get some space between me and Jazir. My friend didn't get the idea of how uncomfortable I was in this situation, and she just walked away. What did Jazir do? Well, he placed myself between me and my friend, right in my vision line. Every fiber of my body felt repulsed when he barged into my personal space. I decided that I could not take a private conversation with him and said, "Oh look, I need to go to my platform," to end it, but he followed me. Through the main lobby, through the train station, and into the elevator and into the train. I was internally screaming and walked through the train until I saw another person. I sat down in the row of seats next to me and Jazir followed. As if every bit of luck had just left me, the other passenger moved seats and went away, so I was alone again. Jazir talked and I showed clear signs of not wanting to continue the conversation. I hoped that he would leave, but the train soon departed. Mind you, the train goes in the opposite direction of his house, and it's a 1-hour walking distance to my workplace. There is no way this man could get anything out of taking that train, except for following me and continuing the conversation. I was freaked out and told him in English that he was acting very weird. Maybe I could have used a different word, but English isn't my first language, and at that point, I only thought about escaping. I couldn't let him see my station or he could easily find my house. I don't live in a rural area, but at 3 a.m. there's really nobody on the streets, so him following me home was terrifying. I thought about getting off a station earlier, but then I would need to get a cab, for which I didn't have any cash on me, or I needed to walk the rest of the way and he could still follow me. I decided to get up at the next station, let him get out of the train first, and then just stay inside while the doors closed. It fortunately worked, but only after telling him clear that this was not my station. I would not get out and he would not get back in. I even held my hand out to stop him from coming back. He stayed outside after the conductor shouted at us to let the door close. So let's rewind a little bit. He is way older than me, but does not get the concept of me not wanting to be in a relationship with him. Whenever he doesn't like an answer, he switches to English, because it just might be me misunderstanding. He followed me 2 times into my train and almost home, without even thinking about how creepy that behavior is. So Jazir, please just leave me alone. I hope I never see you again. You really should get a point and stop being so weird. This happened a few weeks ago and it ties into an older story a little, so I'll talk about that first. When I was 16, I went to a party with some at the time newly made friends, Mary, Jane, Ashley, and Kate. I was new to the area and had never been to a real party before, so it was a big thing for me. And we were sleeping over at Kate's place, owned by her parents. There were 2 houses on the property. The main house and a small recording house with 2 bedrooms and a small living area. The property itself was about a 10-minute drive from town and set off of a busy highway. There were 2 paddocks between it and the houses with a tree line that hid the houses from view. It was secluded, so we all felt pretty safe. Nobody would just walk out there and you would have to know the houses existed in order to even find them, since the area is well known for having a lot of roads off the highway that lead to back roads and the like. The small house was a bit away from the main house, separated from it by a large hedge and a tall gum tree. It was perfect for some teenagers to hold a party away from the adults, and we all assumed it was pretty safe. So there we were, 5 girls, 3 movies, and a bunch of alcohol. And the girls' parents didn't mind if we drank as long as they knew what and how much we were drinking, and that we were on the main property. They expected us to be straightforward, which we were, and while there was enough alcohol to get drunk, it wasn't enough to go stupid. We started the night with a certain horror movie that included a mask-wearing villain, and Sarah Michelle G as the lead actress. About halfway through, it was interrupted by screams as a bat flew through the window. It was summertime and the breeze was great, and it landed on Mary's head. Cue screams, laughter, my catching and releasing the bat. I was the only one willing to go near the poor thing, and the rest of the night ending in a decent haze of us telling horror stories. Most of the stories were pretty tame of stuff that we had heard before. The old escaped mental patient with a hook hand that creeps up on lovers making out in a car and the like. There were a few local legends that caught my attention, since I love creepy stuff and didn't know the local stuff yet. Nothing too scary until it came to Kate's turn. It was a pretty normal story about the local mental asylum, less an asylum than a daycare center for the mentally unfit, and an escaped patient who had last been seen living in an old shack, not far from the property, who snuck into a nearby house and had killed some kids having a party there. That shack just so happened to be the same shack she had pointed out when we had arrived earlier that day, in a paddock that wasn't of her parents' land, but still pretty close to the property. It was spookier for having seen the old shack and knowing how close it was to the house. But still, we managed to sleep safe and sound, and soon daylight came and I went home. Having made new friends and established myself as a bit of a badass by actually touching the bat. I'm a bit of a wuss, so that didn't last for long, though the friendships did. Now fast forward about 16 years. The 3 of us still live in the same area and still keep in touch and are still pretty good friends. It had been a while since we got together, and Kate, Jane, and the other girl who had stayed and I decided it was time to have another get-together. Kate now had a family. Jane and I were still single, and I'm happy for it. So we decided to leave the kids with Kate's husband for the night and stay out in the small house. We were excited, stocking up on our favorite snacks and drinks, picking out some new and old horror movies, and just planning ourselves a good time. The night arrives and we've happily packed into the little lounge area. Now, one thing I mentioned is that this small house has large glass windows in the lounge area, front and back. The 2 bedrooms are to the left and right, with a small bathroom en-suite in the larger one. The windows in the lounge, though, line both the front and back and are basically the walls. You can see straight through the house during the day. There's a sliding door towards the main house that you can go through to enter. So, being still relatively warm at night, having just begun autumn, we've got 2 of the windows open, now with fly wire to keep out the flies, the mosquitoes, and the bats. and the curtains are drawn back so as to not block the breeze, and we're sitting watching scary movies. It's as great a setup for a horror movie as you're imagining, yeah. So, 3 drunk women, all rather small. Kate's a little stockier after having kids, while Jane works out a lot. And she wears a baggy clothes so you can't really tell she's got muscle under them, and she looks pretty small. As for me, I'm pretty short, and while I've got a little poundage, I also tend to wear baggy clothing, so I look a little bit like a midget. We're all hanging out with windows wide open, watching a movie in a room that can be easily looked in. The first movie ends. Deliberately, it's the same movie as the time all those years ago, and we joke about bats flying in and scaring us to bits. Suddenly, mid-laugh, the power cuts out. We all go stock still for a moment and then scrabble for a torch, freaking out a little. Kate finds it, and we were going to use it for scary tales later on, so it wasn't far away. And she decides to take a look at the generator to the east side of the house. Being a farmie, she knows how things run, and since we can see the lights from the main house, we can still see the grounds a bit, so we're all still pretty calm. A power shortage is bound to be the cause, right? So she slips out and Jane grabs a can and stands outside to cool off a bit. I join her, sans can, and we shoot the crap while we wait for Kate to come back. We can hear her grunting and cursing as she wrestles with whatever. I'm not good with mechanics, so I can change a fuse and unclog a sink or change a washer, but that's about it. But suddenly she cheers. The lights flicker on and we head back in. All goes well again, and we decide to forego another horror movie and head on to the comedies instead. So we're watching some comedy and I can't get invested in it. Something is making all the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Kate had been nursing a can for about half an hour, and Jane had stopped drinking altogether and keeps fidgeting, moving her position every 5 minutes or so. I look up at Kate and catch her eyes widen in shock, at the same time as some stupid jump scare happens in the movie. We all jump and a few minutes pass before Jane says that she needs to use the bathroom, and Kate says, "Hey, it's gotten pretty cool now, let's close the windows, okay?" Quite a bit louder than she needed to, since it was only me in the room. Feeling something is wrong, I decide to go along with her and close the second window while she closes the first. I notice that she's locking the window too, and checking the other ones nearby as she does so. Taking the hint, I do the same. She looks at me, and I look back and nod. All the windows seem locked. She then sprints to the door and slams it shut, locking it. I'm in a bit of shock, not sure what she's doing, but figuring that she's doing it for a good reason. Kate doesn't spook easily, and she's a very rational person. She then grabs the torch, and my hand drags me to the bedroom with the in-suite, locks the door, and gets me to help her push the drawer set next to the door against it. Jane isn't in the bathroom. Instead, she's peeking out of the curtains carefully, holding a very ugly vase in her hands like it's a frickin' sword or something. Color me freaked. Something is going on and I have no idea what the heck it is, but 2 of my best friends are acting like paranoid nutters and I'm totally in the dark as to why. 5 seconds later, there's a huge bang coming from the lounge area, and screaming starts. It was hard to make out what the guy was screaming about. Mainly profanities and something about missing the best part. But it was definitely a man's voice, and the man in question was very much disturbed. Terrified, I pushed against the dresser, just in case whoever it was got into the lounge and started beating down the door. The screaming turns into ear-piercing shrieks, and we're all 3 panicking. Jane keeps peering out of the window, ready to smash the vase on anything that pokes through it. Kate's wielding the torch like it's a baton, and I'm frantically clinging to the drawers, eyes searching desperately for something to use as a weapon. Just as I've decided on a stiletto sticking out from under the bed that I can reach if I roll to the left, there's suddenly the sound of running and screeching, getting further away before just stopping. We sit there for a moment, terrified to move. I was breathing pretty heavily, and my heart was racing so hard. It was all I could hear, which was really annoying because I was trying to hear anything that might sound like a footstep, or twigs or leaves crunching or anything. Suddenly, there's a giggle next to the window. A really creepy man giggle. Jane backpedals, scrambling back towards Kate and I'm inching to the left, towards the issue because I'm not going to die without stabbing my attacker with something sharp and pointy. I will refuse to. The creepy giggles continue at the window, and there's this odd sound, like someone is trying to scratch at the glass. It's really creepy and we're all really freaking out. Suddenly we hear Kate's husband shout, "Hey you, what the heck do you think you're doing?" And then a gunshot. Now, I live in Australia and we have strict gun laws. I didn't even know that Kate's husband had a gun. But apparently he's had a rifle since they live in the bush and have to deal with kangaroos and other wildlife pretty often. And he knows how to use it. There's a sound of running and branches breaking. Jake, the husband, yelling at someone to keep going and never to come back or else. And another gunshot. And then everything goes quiet for a while. Finally, we hear Jake telling us to come out that it's all safe. The cops are called and they take their time to arrive and then take statements. And that's when I hear what exactly I had missed. Apparently, while I was only feeling weird and paranoid, Kate actually saw a reflection in the glass of the window. The reflection coming from the other windows, of a man's face behind us. She said that he had looked old with really worn out skin, like leather, really old leather, and wild eyes that were really crazy and shining. She also said that from what she could tell he had no teeth, and that his hair was really matted. Jake said that he didn't get a good look at the guy's face, but said that his clothes were really old and tattered, and that he had worn what looked like an old dark coat, dirty brown pants, and boots of some kind. Kate had then sent Jane a text which told her to go to the bathroom and ring the house number, telling Jake to get his rifle because there was a possible intruder on the property. And Kate couldn't because her mobile was out of call credits, leaving only text messages, and Jake's mobile was turned off when he gets home since he doesn't want to be interrupted. When Jane did that, Kate gave a good reason to close and lock the windows and door, and then grabbed me and blockaded ourselves in the room. Jane had actually seen the guy prowling when she was on the way to the toilet. Apparently, he had tried to circle around to the other side of the house to check on the windows there, but she couldn't get a good look, but said his hair looked really long and matted, and that his coat and pants were both dark and old, and had drawn all the curtains after checking the windows. Jane also said that she had felt like someone was watching us earlier when Kate was fixing the power. And Kate said that she's not so sure that the power failure was just a normal power outage, or if there had been some tampering. It was dark and she couldn't tell, but we've decided that it's a bit too coincidental that it just happened to go out like that. The rest of the night was spent in the main house, just talking and calming down over cups of tea, and trying to get the kids back to bed. The gunfire had woken them up. We later learned that the guy wasn't found, but his campsite was. The old shack where locals said escaped mental patients used to live. Police seemed to think that he was just a squatter who was drawn to the light of the TV and the sound of merriment. The shack has since been bought by Kate, and a few days ago she and Jake tore it down. She said that she couldn't rest easily knowing that it could be used by anyone who could harm her family, even if they were only squatters. She's got plans to get a few alpacas, great protectors, and home them in the paddock, in case the guy decides to come back. The following experience happened to me a few years ago when I was on the train home from school. It was around 10 p.m. at night, and I had stayed back in a public library to study. One thing you should know is that my train line is really dodgy, and you can meet some truly weird people on the train when it's late. When I got into my carriage that night, it was empty apart from 3 women sitting on the opposite end of the carriage. Sat down and plugged in my earphones to watch YouTube. My train ride usually takes around 45 minutes, about 3 stops into the train ride, and the only other person who had gotten onto my carriage at the time was a man who was wearing construction clothing. He sat near the 3 other women, so I assumed that he knew them, but I turned my attention back to my video. A few minutes later, I noticed that the 3 women who was sitting on the opposite side of my carriage had moved to my side. I didn't really think much of it as I was engrossed in the video that I was watching. That's when I noticed someone take a seat opposite of me. It was the man who had gotten on earlier. He asked me my name, but he was giving me a weird vibe, so I pretended like I couldn't hear him. I had earphones in after all. He then proceeded to tap my knee to get my attention. There was no ignoring him, so I removed my earphones and looked at him. He was a big guy, probably around early 40s, and he was clean-shaven. He asked my name, and so I gave him a fake name. He then asked me how old I was. I was in my school uniform at the time, so I told him. He reached out his hand and introduced himself. Not wanting to be rude, I extended my own hand to shake his hand. This is when things started to get weird. His handshake was super weird. His grip was abnormally tight, and he seems to pull my hand towards him as he shook it. I quickly withdrew my hand. He then asked me if I had a girlfriend, as he thought I was quite attractive. Alarm bells began to ring on my head, and I glanced over at the three women who refused to even look over in my direction. Seeing as they would be no help, I would have to look out for myself. He then took out his phone and started showing me pictures of a girl who seemed to look around my age. He then asked me if I thought she was beautiful. Again, not wanting to be rude, I simply nodded and said that she was. He then asked me if I would be interested in marrying her. I started laughing, as I thought that he was really just joking around, but his eyes were dead serious, and he just glared at me. He repeated his question, to which I responded that I didn't even know her, and that it was a little inappropriate. He suggested that I give him my number so that he could arrange for us to meet. Now this seriously creeped me out, and I politely declined, stating that I was busy with school and that I wasn't looking to get into a relationship. As I said this, the train was coming to a halt at a station. I was still 3 stops away from mine, but I decided it was time for me to get out of this situation. I apologized that this was my stop, and that hey, it was nice to meet him. As I got up to leave, he extended his hand for a handshake and thanked me for talking to him. I didn't want to shake his hand, but I didn't want to trigger him, so I reached out my hand. Suddenly, he grabbed my hand and pulled it towards me. His eyes were full of anger. He then asked, "What? You don't want to screw my daughter? I will break you." I quickly broke the grip and left the carriage. As it was nighttime, there were always police officers patrolling the platforms. I rushed towards one of the officers and told him everything that happened. I then described his clothing and which carriage he was sitting in. While waiting for the next train, the same officer came up to me and told me that officers had picked him up 2 stations down and thanked me for letting him know. Although the officer asked for my details, I was never notified of what had happened to the guy. Still, I'm not overly shook up about it. I just never want to see that guy again. So this won't be too detailed since I was pretty drunk when this happened, but back when I was living in another city, I had gotten a text from one of my friends telling me to meet up with him at a bar that wasn't far from my apartment. At the time, so I decided a quick scoot down for a few drinks wouldn't be bad. Well, as many of you understand, a few drinks turned into plenty of them. So my friend told me they needed to use the bathroom and not to go anywhere. I tend to wander off when I'm drunk, so that's not the point though. As soon as they left, here comes an old man. The old man immediately starts scoping out the area and recognizes me being alone and obviously too drunk to really be there anymore. He starts talking to me about, from what I can remember, an old bottle of whiskey that he kept in his house somewhere. While I'm drunk, I'm much more trusted and social than I usually am, so I started talking to him a little bit and he bought me more shots. Meanwhile, my friend was trying to get around the people to get to where we were sitting. I think I was on my 4th shot when he picked up my jacket and offered to take me to another bar nearby. I told him no since I was still waiting for my friend, but he kept insisting that I should go with him, and kept on pressing, saying that his car was just outside. Meanwhile, I was beyond my limit and was probably a few more drinks from blacking out completely. You could tell visibly that I needed to go home and I couldn't handle anymore. Finally, my friend found me and I can't remember how they got me away from the guy, but they told me the entire time they were walking me back to the apartment. that they were feeling as if someone was watching and following them from a distance. I live in a large city in Canada where I go to the university downtown. I take the land rail train back and forth between home and campus. It's usually a 15-minute walk between the train station and my house, but I need to cut between an apartment building scheduled for demolishment and then a very tiny stretch of trees in order to reach the path that runs behind the tracks. My train station is next to a rec facility used for volleyball and basketball. The train is partially underground and partially above ground, and I get off at the station directly across from my university. However, it is often quite sketchy as it is downtown, and my city is quite well known for a crime rate. I'm a sciences student and I often find myself in the lab until later in the evening. Because it's winter and further north than most Canadian cities, it gets dark really early. I usually call my mom or boyfriend in my walk to the train station, as I've had several creepy encounters in the past. One of which I was waiting at the light to cross the street to the train, and a homeless man approached me and got really close to my face. At the time, my mom was in my headphones, so she heard him say, "You have really pretty eyes." It was almost comedic when my mom said, "Run," in the same tone as the song where the beat drops after run. Luckily for me, there were other students present and it never escalated after he had walked away, and I just muttered a quiet, "Thanks," and I shuffled away from him. Now, everyone who takes public transit in a large city knows that there is your fair share of homeless and druggies that you really just avoid eye contact with and continue on. This experience that I'm going to tell you about was much more serious and a lot more sinister. One morning in the dead of winter, I was walking to the train station around 11. There were a lot of people walking, so I felt pretty secure and didn't pay too much attention to the man in the long black coat and gray gloves that was walking in the same direction as me after the abandoned apartment buildings. I boarded the train along with another dozen people. It wasn't until that night that I realized I probably should have been paying closer attention. I had a late lab, so I took the nearby empty train home well after rush hour. It was about 8:30 or 9 p.m., so it was dark and there was a decent amount of snow coming down. I got off the train at my stop along with a group of young people, with the logo of the university that trains at the nearby rec facility. They also got off the train and were walking to the building in clumps. I didn't notice the man from that morning immediately because, as I started on my path, I was looking at my phone to call my mom for the walk. I should have been paying more attention because I didn't actually notice him until he stepped directly in front of me to intercept me along the path. I looked up startled. The man was wearing a long black wool coat, gray mittens, and a gray toque. He looked to be in his late 20s to mid-30s and had a closely trimmed brown beard and brown hair that stuck out from under his toque. He smiled at me, but his blue eyes looked cold despite it. I immediately started running through my imaginary scenarios on what to do, and took a quick glance over my shoulder to the university athletes, who were almost to the rec center and steadily getting further away from me. The man and I were very nearly alone. He said to me, "You're very pretty to be out so late. Where you headed to?" My heart dropped. I really wish that I was witty or good at thinking fast on my feet because all I said was, "Nowhere." He acted as if I didn't say anything and took a step towards me, still smiling that creepy smile of white death and dead, cold eyes. "I can walk you home if you like." I just stared at him in horror and continued, "You live that way, don't you?" And he pointed in the direction of my shortcut through the trees by the old apartment buildings. At this point, it clicked that this man had followed me from the apartments to the train this morning. He knew which station that I would get off at and which path to wait for me on my way home. All I knew at this point was that I could not let this man know where I live, and I couldn't go home through the isolated shortcut where he could do God knows what to me. Instead, I made a blatant lie and said, "No, I practice." I was hoping my backpack and general university student look would be enough for me to sell it, as I quickly turned and scurried after the student athletes. As I got to the doors, I turned to look at the man. He hadn't moved and he was staring at me. I had never seen that look in a person's eye before. It was so malicious and his smile was replaced by a sneer. As soon as I was inside, I darted towards the largest group of people I could find and I called my sister, who I was living with at the time. I told her what had happened and asked her to come pick me up. I had a sneaking suspicion that the man was still waiting for me to attempt to walk home. She said that she was still driving home from work and was about 5 to 10 minutes away, but that she would pick me up right outside the rec center doors. It was the longest minutes of my life as I started at the facility doors, waiting for the man to come in to look for me. He never did though. My sister called when she pulled up and I pretty much ran from the building to her car and she hit the lock button as soon as I got in. The drive home follows my usual walking path for a while, but forks off close to my shortcut through the woods. As we drove past, I gasped and pointed out the indistinct shadow of a man among the trees. I knew that it was him and I knew that he was waiting for me. I never saw the man again, but now whenever it's dark out and it isn't busy hours for commuting, I get off at the next station and walk home from there, as I walk beside a very busy street. Even though it's about 5 minutes longer to walk, it's totally worth it. I never want to see those cold blue eyes ever again. This occurred in 2017 and it's 100% true. Due to a multitude of factors including a recent death of a close friend, I was unbearably depressed at this time of my life. For that reason, my family flew across the country to visit me in LA where I live, and we thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent to us that it was the off-season. It was late November and the weather was cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. My first priority was to ditch our luggage so we could explore the island, so we immediately checked into our motel. Though that word hardly does the place any justice. I call it a motel because all the doors of the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality, our room was one of 20 to 30 quaint guest house looking buildings, arranged in a sort of horseshoe shape around a walkway, with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points of the horseshoe, and if you walked dead straight, you would reach the room that we were given, essentially on the corner before you have to go right to go further into the horseshoe. So from our room, one path led back to the street, the other one further into these secluded maze of rooms. Now stay with me. After a day of exploring and having just finished up dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and let me just say, it gets dark. Similarly dark was my headspace after the dinner conversation took a left-hand turn, and my overwhelming depression got the best of me. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them that I just needed to go to sleep. And I did immediately. Depression sometimes makes that easy. I was already losing consciousness as they had entered after me, drifting off without so much as a good night. I then woke up to my mom saying my name, a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, and my parents' bed was closer to the door, and mine was further in the room. My mom's voice cut through the silence again. She sounded concerned for me. I didn't blame her considering my mental state at the time. Groggy, I rolled over her. "What?" I asked. As my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming in through the curtains, I saw her turn to face me. She was surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes got wide. If I'm in my bed, who is she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously looking to see, a hooded figure in all black standing over their bed. Now, I know that you're reading this and knowing a creepy thing is going to happen, but understand how horrifically startling it would be to be on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded figure looming over you. This moment seemed to last forever. Now, life isn't like movies where characters unleash a blood-curdling scream. Sometimes, the only thing that comes out is something panicked and guttural. My mom's words became low and severe as she said my dad's name in a dire voice that I had never heard her use before. And then the hooded figure did something so bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead, it crouched in the corner near where it stood. The way that it crouched was so absolutely unexpected, even in regards to this already unexpected situation, that it terrified me. It seemed animalistic. I knew two things. The hooded figure had been standing over us sleeping, and it's not acting in any sort of way that I can understand, as opposed to the infinite moment of this figure standing over us mere seconds ago. The series of events that unfolded when my hulking, ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly, we were out of the door, not knowing which way the intruder went. My mom was screaming, "Get him, get him!" My dad was running down one path of the horseshoe, further into the hotel, shouting through sheer adrenaline, "I'm going to kill you." I ran down the other path towards the street. When I got there, not a sign of the intruder, but it became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quietly walking back, his head hung low. He gets really close to me and I hear him say, "It's a freaking kid." The explanation that he said was it was some young teen who was tall and lengthy as I am in my 20s, wearing all black including a black hoodie, and he had gone into the wrong room, our room. The one time my parents had just so happened to forget to lock the door. My mom woke up when he had entered and seeing a tall person in a black hoodie, she thought that it was me, assumingly leaving the room in a depressive episode. And when the hooded figure had crouched, that was him realizing his mistake and panicking. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugs this kid, who's now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with a murder in his eyes. So, this happened in 2016 when I was 17 years old. I was a first-year college student in film school. I'm 22 now, and I'm Julia, by the way. I lived alone in my first ever apartment. It was really small, but I was really proud of my independence for it. Now, I never felt unsafe in this apartment for several reasons. There were multiple gates in the residence that needed to be opened, though, through a code that only people who lived there knew. My door had 3 different locks, and it was right next to the university, so most people who lived in the neighborhood were college students anyway. Nothing bad had ever happened in the neighborhood before. I've always been very careful with locking the door when I leave my home. I always check twice. I have slight OCD. So this one time, I leave to go to class and I locked my door. But for some reason, I couldn't get the key out of the lock. It was completely stuck, so I went to go get the caretaker of the building to help me. But he wasn't there and I was getting late for class. So I went to class with the key still in the lock. I took off the keychain first so it wasn't too noticeable. When I got home, the caretaker was back, so he came to help me, and we couldn't get it out for like 15 minutes until somehow he finally did. He told me that the lock was damaged, but that I didn't necessarily need to change it if I only locked it once instead of twice. I just said okay, and that was the end of it. I really wasn't worried because of how safe I felt in this building. Flash forward to about 2 months later, I was taking out the trash one night around 11 p.m. while on the phone with my sister. I remember telling her that I was taking out the trash, and then that I would take a shower afterwards before heading to a party. As I previously said, I always locked the door, even just to take out the trash. But because of my lock being damaged, I only locked it once. When I got back to my apartment, I found the door unlocked, which immediately alarmed me. So I went into the apartment and I locked the door immediately, with 3 different types of locks. Now when you walk into my apartment, which is only about 215 square feet, you have the main room in front of you and the bathroom door immediately to your left. I had left the bathroom door slightly open, just enough so I could see a man in my shower, turning his back to me. Naturally, when I saw this, I tried to open the door and leave as quickly as I could. Except my main lock was damaged from 2 months earlier, and I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried. In this moment, all I could think of was the fact that I needed to leave as fast as possible. I jumped out of the window without even really thinking. I figured it was the only solution, except I lived on the 2nd floor, so I completely smashed my ankles on the landing. I started running in whichever way I could, and when I got a little bit further from the building, I looked back and a man was there at my window watching me run away. I thought of 2 possible outcomes. Either the man was going to jump and chase after me, except I wouldn't get far with my twisted ankles, or he would get scared of the height and be locked in my apartment. Thankfully, he picked option 2. I went to hide in a bush a little further and I called the police, who arrived in just 10 minutes because I lived close to the station. They had pushed the door open and the man was there just sitting on my couch holding a kitchen knife, waiting for me to come back like he didn't think that I would call the cops. They arrested the guy and later told me that he had already been arrested for a series of crimes. They also told me how everything had happened. Like I said, it was a very friendly neighborhood with mostly college students, so we got inside the building by other people holding the door for him. He then heard me telling my sister that I was going to take a shower, which was why he was waiting in the bathroom for me. He had crocheted my lock while I was taking out the trash, and he apparently noticed me on the school campus, and he had followed me home several times before succeeding to actually come in. He stayed inside waiting for me because I had recently changed my phone, and the previous one was still on the table, so he thought that I didn't have a phone with me to call the police. I don't live there anymore, but after that, to get into the building, we all needed ID proving that we lived there. Building IDs were created and we had to scan them every time, and it was the only way to go inside of the building. Nothing bad had happened in the neighborhood after that, and it's back to being very peaceful and friendly. A little bit of background. Around November of 2019, I was running to Target for some cupcake decorating supplies before me and my aunt and cousin for lunch later that day at a relatively nice restaurant. This being the case, I was slightly dressed up. Nothing too fancy, but I did look slightly older. It was around 10 in the morning and I was walking to my car from the Target. I had parked pretty far back in the parking lot because I hate fighting for parking spaces. Suddenly, a truck quickly pulls into the parking spot a little bit in front of me, and a man gets out. I was very freaked out as he started to walk up to me. He asked if I was single and tells me that I was the most beautiful woman that he had ever seen. I tell him that I'm underage and that I have a boyfriend. I was lying about the boyfriend, to which he replies that he would wait. This dude had to at least be 40. He then goes back into the truck and backs into a spot at the back of the parking lot of this particular shopping center. I was about halfway to my car at this point, but no way in heck was I getting in my car, because he was watching me. So instead, I walked into a nearby frozen yogurt place. I looked visibly panicked and I quickly grabbed a cup of yogurt and tried to look natural because this guy was looking at me through the windows. I called my best friend who lives in a neighborhood close to the shopping center, and he quickly said that he would be there soon. Around 10 to 12 minutes later, my friend came and picked me up from the yogurt place. When we pulled out of the parking lot, the dude in the truck had started to follow us. We started to drive around as I texted my aunt that I needed to push lunch back about 30 minutes. My friend and I took a bunch of back roads in the area and drove through some confusing neighborhoods and eventually lost the guy. My friend is an absolute hero and he took me back to my car in the parking lot. I was going to run some more small errands before going to lunch, but that obviously didn't happen.